Hi, I'm a 90s kid, and I grew up on some really weird shit. And because I'm a huge nerd, we're gonna rate all of the shows that I watched from the 90s through to the noughties on a very professional tier list here, based on how good a D&D premise they would make. And to make this a very professional process, very scientific, we're gonna take 4 aspects from each show and rate them out of 5. So we're gonna take the world building, we're gonna look at the magic system or the powers and abilities available to characters in those shows. We're then gonna look at its adaptability, how easy it is to convert that show into a D&D campaign in terms of mechanics and how the world works in that show, and is it easy to transfer over. And then finally, we are going to look at the overall story or premise and how fun or cool that would be to put into a D&D campaign, or how feasible it would be. A lot of the shows from this time, for example, are very episodic or Monster of the Week themed, and so those kind of work in D&D, but for like a really fulfilling campaign, we kind of are going to be looking at the long-term campaigns for this, or just premises that are so unique and fun that they just rate super highly regardless. Because I'm using such a scientific procedure here too, it's very hard to argue with everything that I say, but do know that every show here that I mentioned can totally be made into a D&D campaign. In fact, I challenge you in the comments to pick and choose the lowest rated shows that I rate here and tell me why they can be D&D campaigns and how you would turn them into one. So to start off strong, we're going to be looking at probably one of the longest running shows from that time, and that is SpongeBob SquarePants, because I think SpongeBob SquarePants, if I'm not wrong, is still running today. As for world building, you've got a bunch of sea creatures that live under the water, where basically everything runs the exact same as if it was on the surface, but there are occasionally some water physics there. I would say it's such a unique kind of world that they are in. I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5 for world building. You have so many kind of factions and characters and lore and histories in this world. You've got like David Hasselhoff is also a character, so you're including the old Baywatch series in this world, and this universe is huge. So we're gonna give SpongeBob's world building a 4 out of 5. As for a power system, SpongeBob SquarePants kind of uses Looney Toon logic, where no one has powers necessarily, but they can do absurdly crazy cartoon things. They basically have the ability to manipulate reality in any way, shape, or form, so long as it makes the show funnier. But because it's so obscure and it's not really defined, there's not really a defined magic system in the show, I'm going to give it a 2 out of 5. And also, because of this same logic and because the world is so absurd and just hard to pinpoint down and like crunch down into numbers and rules, because SpongeBob defies all logic and rules, I'm only going to give the adaptability of the show a 1 out of 5. However, the overall premise and story is so absurd and fun, and I'm gonna give it a very middle of the road here, rating it a 2.5 out of 5, because it is a very fun premise, but I don't know how fun it would be as a D&D story if you are just going to a burger place, making burgers every day, occasionally protecting a recipe from a tiny little plankton creature. I mean, there is so much fun here, but overall, I think it would get very old very quickly, which is not the reality at all for the actual show of SpongeBob. SpongeBob is still going today. In fact, because I think SpongeBob is running for so long, there is something there that people enjoy and keep coming back to. So maybe I'll push it up to a 3 for the overall story or premise. This will give SpongeBob an overall rating of 10 out of 20. So really up there in the middle of the road, we're going to be putting SpongeBob into C tier. Now, next on our list is a show that I only heard rumors about in the playground, and when I discovered it and actually watched it, I thought this was the coolest premise for a show ever, and that is Danny Phantom. Danny Phantom is a teenage boy whose parents are like Ghostbusters, and he goes into a ghost portal where they throw rogue ghosts into, and he got ghost powers. So he has all the powers of the ghosts, which was not something I had ever experienced as a kid before. This blew me away. As for world building, for Danny Phantom, I'm gonna give it a 3.5 out of 5. Now, a lot of shows here on this list are very much set in the real world. And any of those shows that are set in the real world are going to get a fat 0 unless there is something strange or unusual about that world. In Danny Phantom's case, it does lose some points for being in a mundane world, but there are ghosts, and there is a ghost world that exists as well that bleeds into this world. So I'm going to give it a 3.5 because Danny Phantom is set in this very mundane world for the most part. I'm actually going to lower it down to that 3.5 instead of giving it a 4. Because you don't go to the ghost world all that often. The world building is kind of cool, but they don't go into a whole bunch of depth with it. As for powers and abilities, I think they're the coolest freaking powers in the world. I'm gonna give them a 4.5, only knocking them down a little bit because they are a little obscure and they're not very varied. There is only Danny Phantom who has ghost powers. No one else really has ghost power or other powers in this world. And so that's why it's only going to get a 4.5. In terms of adaptability, I think this is actually very easy to adapt. You just need to take any class that has death-related abilities. There's like rogues there's undead warlocks and death clerics and all that kind of stuff. You've got loads of abilities in D&D that can be ghost-related. And there's loads of spells as well included there. So if you want to have a ghost-themed party in this that all have ghost powers, I think it's very easy to do. The only thing is obviously it's going to be a little limited. So again, I'm going to give it a 4.5 out of 10. Out of 5, not out of 10. 4.5 out of 5. And then finally for the story and premise, I think it's a really fun premise that ghosts get out of this portal every now and then. They wreak havoc on your high school life. High school is a fun kind of premise to work with anyway, that you've got to manage your everyday high school kind of drama alongside trying to hide your secret identity and save the world from ghosts. I think that's a fun premise, and I think you can have a lot of longevity with that. So I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5 for its story and premise, which will put Danny Phantom just about up here in A tier with a 16.5. I'm going to put it just a little bit over here to just leave space for the other things soon to come, which will be a bit higher than Danny Phantom. Now, next up, we have Dexter's Labratory. This is an interesting show. I didn't watch a whole bunch of it, though I did watch a fair share of this show. Basically, you got a small kid genius here who is trying to build all these different problems and solutions using technology and his big brain. Like at one stage, he's trying to learn French. He can't learn French. And so instead of learning the actual language, he builds a machine that will hopefully teach him how to say French stuff. But a huge part of this show is he has an older sister who will constantly try to mess up all his inventions. And so I think actually if you were to do this as a premise, make this a premise, I actually think it would be a really fun story if you were to make Dexter the actual villain of the campaign and you guys are actually just trying to meddle with him the whole time. You know, villain, you were probably the villains, to be fair. And I think that would be more fun than actually being Dexter. Though tell me in the comments what you think you would prefer. If you think you should be all just kid geniuses trying to do really cool stuff with a bunch of low IQ individuals constantly foiling your plans. I think the other way around is a lot more fun. But I'm up to being convinced. In terms of world building though, Dexter's Labratory I don't think has any world building. It's just set in the everyday world. The only thing that makes things supernatural is Dexter himself and the stuff that he can create. But overall, the world is not unusual by any means. As for powers and abilities, you have a very smart kid, and that is the extent of it. I'm sure there is a lot of like magic item focused stuff in this campaign in terms of the inventions that Dexter actually makes, but I'm going to give it a 2 out of 5 in terms of powers and abilities. In terms of adaptability, it's kind of easy enough to adapt, though there's so many mundane things going on. I don't think you're going to ever really have like combat or any difficult situations to solve. It's a weird one to adapt because yes, you could totally adapt D&D's rules around it. D&D is just a huge sandbox, so you can adapt loads of things into D&D. But in terms of like if you would want to and why you would, I'm going to actually rate it quite low here, and I'm going to only give it a 2 out of 5 in terms of adaptability. Sure, Dexter is just an artificer, and you could have an all Artificers campaign. But then outside of that, to still make it Dexter's Labratory, there's not much else you're adapting here. And I actually think it'll be quite boring in terms of like adapting to rules. The more rules you give it, the less and less like Dexter's Labratory it'll actually be, because essentially Dexter can kind of build anything, right? And so to have rules for building anything, that's just like a creative soup. I'm rambling, but I just don't think it's one that's worth converting. As for the story then, and the overall repetitive cycle of going out there and building machines and being foiled by your sister or whatever, or other way around, you foiling a big guy, genius guy's experiments, I don't think that's going to be very fun. It might be fun in like a one shot, but overall for the longevity, I don't know. I'm going to give this 1 or a 2. I think I might even I'm going to give it a 2 because it's kind of unique. But this is still going to leave Dexter down here in poopy tier. Dexter's Labratory is a poopy tier campaign. But on the topic of boy geniuses, we've also got Jimmy Neutron, whose world is again very mundane and normal, but in the movie there are aliens. So, you know, aliens are confirmed, so maybe there's a bit more interesting world building there. I'm going to give it a 2 out of 5 for world building. Actually, I might even rate it a little lower. I might actually just give it a 1 out of 5 because I think that's the extent of it. That's as surreal as it gets. So because it's slightly different from the real world, a 1 out of 5. In terms of powers and abilities then, I'm going to give it a 2 out of 5, similar to Dexter, because it's just one kid who is very smart and there's not other cool powers and abilities after that. Most of the characters in this are children as well, so they're kind of even less competent than an adult, though a lot of the adults in this world are incredibly incompetent. So it's a hard one, but I'm going to give it a 2 out of 5. In terms of adaptability, that might be the easiest one to do here, just being an artificer and having a bunch of kids. You know, there's more characters in Jimmy Neutron, which is actually kind of going to push it up a little bit because at least there's more to draw from in terms of inspiration in this world. So I'm going to give it a 3 out of 5 for adaptability. And then finally, the story and premise is kind of fun. You know, it's a genius kid who's constantly kind of screwing himself up with his inventions. And a lot of the characters are pretty fun. And I think the movie is very interesting as well to take as a premise where all the adults have disappeared and are being brainwashed by aliens. You know, there's some wild and wacky stuff they do in Jimmy Neutron. And so because of that, I think I'm going to give it 3 out of 5 as well. Something along those lines. I think there's a lot you can do with this. You can be quite creative, especially if you have your players constantly have their inventions be the doom of themselves every single time. So this is going to give Jimmy Neutron a 9 out of 20, placing it just beside SpongeBob SquarePants. Next up on our list is a show I actually adored as a kid, and that is the Powerpuff Girls. I love the Powerpuff Girls. I think it's also a really weird show. There is so many weird things going on in this show. Overall, the world is pretty mundane, being set primarily in one big kind of metropolis city, but there's a lot of supernatural stuff going on. You've got a super intelligent monkey, Mojo Jojo. You've got him, who is just absolutely terrifying.
They're fighting because of you. Because you believe your toys can really talk.
Everything goes red when he comes on screen, and everything, the voice just still to this day, when I hear him's voice, it gives me shivers. That they're such a scary villain. You've got bacteria people. There's so much going on here. But again, because it's still overall a mundane, everyday city, I'm going to knock it a couple of points, giving it a 3 out of 5 here for world building. In terms of powers and abilities, yes, the Powerpuff Girls have a lot of powers, but their powers are so generic. You know, they just punch and fly. I think maybe they have laser eyes, but overall, there's no kind of unique magic system or power system. They just kind of do very generic superhero stuff. So I'm going to give it a 2.5 here. for powers and abilities just because they're not unique or memorable in any way. In terms of adaptability then, because the powers of the Powerpuff Girls are very generic, yes, but they're not as abstract as the likes of SpongeBob's powers, I'm actually going to rate them quite highly, giving the adaptability of the Powerpuff Girls maybe a 4 out of 5. And then overall, the story or premise where you are a bunch of tiny children with superpowers beating the hell out of monsters, very strange monsters as well, in very weird situations, I think this is actually very fun and unique. I actually think the idea of playing children beating the hell out of like big monsters and stuff is a really fun premise, and so I'm actually going to rate it highly enough, giving Powerpuff's story and premise a 4 out of 5, which will give Powerpuff Girls a total of, let me check my notes, quick math, 13.5, I think. Yeah, 13.5 is what I'm going to give Powerpuff Girls, bringing Powerpuff Girls up here into B tier, our very first B tier show. I've got a bunch of notes written down here that I constantly need to check, so I'm just like, is that the right number? There's a lot of numbers to keep track of here. You might see me in this video looking down at my many notes that I've taken down from the show. I took this shit seriously. I went back and watched so many hours of TV shows to get this right. So, if you're enjoying this video and you appreciate what I've done, like the video, share it with your friends, and check out another one of mine after this video is done. I made another tier list based on all these animes, about 50 different animes, and how good a D&D premise they would be as well. So check that out after this if you're interested. Next up is a show I always enjoyed watching when it came up on the TV. Very similar style to Danny Phantom. This is Fairly Odd Parents. The premise of the show revolves around this kid, Jimmy, I believe. Jimmy was a very unhappy boy, and so got two Fairly Odd Parents sent to him to grant him whatever wishes he desired. And now the whole premise of the show revolves around him wanting something, wishing for it, then realizing he never wished for it and it ruining his life or whatever, and then in the end unwishing it, and thus ending the cycle so that the show ends the same way it began, only now he has learned a little bit of a lesson. I think as a D&D premise, this would be really fun if you are the very odd parents of a spoilt or sad child, and the whole premise of the show is you granting them wishes, but trying to teach the child a lesson in the process. Maybe to a point where you are too punishing and the wish that you grant, then skewed by the DM, turns into something diabolical and potentially world-ending every single time. I also kind of like the idea of the premise of like the DM, playing as this child and presenting a new challenge for you as the wish granters to achieve for this child. And I kind of also like the idea, because the wish spell is so powerful, potentially you could all be spellcasters, but maybe all of you only have one wish spell that you can use per day that you might want to save in case something gets screwed up. So if you can grant his wish without using the wish spell, you maybe get bonus points, you maybe get more experience, or you level up a bit more throughout the campaign. Maybe you get stronger as spellcasters throughout the campaign, and you're actually working your way towards the wish spell, but you say all the spells and magic that you use is the wish spell in general. I don't know, I'm saying wish a lot. I just think there's a lot of potential here for a fun story. And so, first of all, in terms of world building in this world, I'm going to give it a 3 out of 5. Yes, it's pretty unusual. You've got the land of all of these Fairly Odd Parents, these that grant wishes and things. It's a very corporate world, if I remember correctly. Like, they're in offices, like this is their day job, is granting wishes for children, which is very fun. But again, I'm docking in a few points here because primarily the premise of the show is set in the everyday modern day life, which makes it, a little less special. As for powers and abilities, because you can kind of wish for anything, you have the ability to do anything. Again, going back to Looney Tunes logic, but there is some sort of structure there. Potentially, maybe even like the bigger the wish, the more it can go askew and go a little weird. I'm going to give the powers and abilities a 3.5 here. As for adaptability then, I think it's kind of easy enough. Those stats and choosing classes or characters may be a little tricky, but potentially just using the wish mechanic spells and some basic D&D mechanics, you could make this a D&D campaign. You could convert it into the rules. I mean, again, you can convert anything into D&D if you really, really try. I'm going to give it a 3.5 out of 5 in terms of adaptability. In terms of a story or a premise, I think it's a really fun one. I think it'd be really refreshing for a lot of players, but I also think that the longevity of this show is kind of lackluster. I think you'll get bored of it pretty quickly. So I'm going to give it a 3 out of 5 for Very Odd Parents' story and premise, which is going to place Very Odd Parents up here in B tier just after the Powerpuff Girls. Next on our list is a super cool show that I absolutely adored. I watched it every single time it came on the TV. It also had a bit of a story to it, so every episode wasn't just like self-contained. There was like an ongoing story to Jackie Chan adventures, and I loved it. It was so cool. The premise of having talismans that give you unique powers, like this one. This is the dragon talisman. If you're holding it, I think you have dragon breath or laser eyes or something like that. There's like a sheep talisman that lets you leave your body and I think enter the dreams of people. You've got a rat talisman that I think petrifies people. There's so many strange powers and abilities in this, and it was so fun to see them using them in fun and interesting ways. Later on, you've got these other artifacts that also have other unique powers that are connected to demons, so they kind of give you demonic powers. There's so many cool things. This is an artifact-heavy campaign where magic items are a big focus, but at the same time, Jackie Chan is cool as hell, and he's still like a badass without any of the talismans, and there's a lot of characters in this who are super powerful and strong, and they all bring a lot to the table without the use of these magic items. Overall, Jackie Chan, yes, is set in the everyday modern world, but there is a lot of mythology and kind of supernatural stuff. There is a supernatural world in this. So I'm going to actually give, and there's several different worlds as well, and they have time travel later on in this, so there's future stuff that comes into the past or the present day. And so I'm actually going to give, I'm going to be a bit generous here, and maybe I'm a bit biased, but I'm actually going to give Jackie Chan's world building a 4 out of 5, just because it's pretty well thought out. And there's a lot of thought and love put into the world building of this show, which is why I'm giving it quite a high score, but knocking it down 1 because it is, again, set in the everyday world. In terms of powers and abilities then, for Jackie Chan's adventures, there's so much here. Not only do you have all the cool kung fu stuff, but you've also got the talismans and you've got those other artifacts connected to demons later on in the show. Overall, there's such a nice variety, and they're really refreshing and unique powers. And I think because, in a way, they are so limiting, you need to have a talisman on you to use its powers. And what it can do, it's not super crazy by any means, but you're limited to what you can do, and you've got to be creative with the powers and abilities that you have. And so I think that in itself is very fun. I'm going to give it a 4.5 out of 5 for powers and abilities. I'm just knocking it down a tiny bit because they are a little limited. There's only 12 talismans and there are some other masks and other artifacts. So you can't be super cool and magical without these in the world. This is the only reason I'm knocking it down a little bit. As for adaptability then, like I said, a lot of the characters, even without these magic items, are very capable. And so I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5, only knocking it down a few pegs because the campaign that you run in like a Jackie Chan Adventures world is going to have some limitations. You're not always going to be a spellcaster, although Uncle is kind of a weird spellcaster character in this, so maybe magic is also allowed. I'm going to give it a 4.5 out of 5. It's a tricky one, or maybe I'll stick with a 4. I'm going to go with my gut here and say it's a 4 out of 5 for adaptability. Pretty easy to do though. And then finally, for story and premise, it's like a big collectathon, but there's a lot of fun stuff in the world. The overall story is really interesting. You know, Jackie Chan is taking in his niece and looking after her. So I think that's also just a fun little additional thing there. You're trying to stop the evil people collecting talismans before you. And what I do like about Jackie Chan is that a lot of the time they will lose. They won't get the talismans, or sometimes they'll have the talismans stolen off them. But it doesn't mean like it's an end-all situation. If all bad guys get all the talismans, they're going to awaken this big serpent-like creature. And it does actually happen towards the end, maybe the first or second season of the show. Xiaolin, I think, is the name of the evil guy. And when he gets all the talismans, he's now in this real form. And even then, the campaign is not over, because now you've just got a really cool boss fight to take on. And there's a really, really cool fight scene in that where like Jackie Chan is like reaching in to the serpent guy and taking out talismans from him and then using those talismans to fight him and stuff. God, there's so many cool ideas in this show. I'm going to give it a 5 out of 5 for story and premise. Overall, this is going to give Jackie Chan's Adventures a 17.5 out of 20, which is going to put it in A tier, just ahead of Danny Phantom. I actually think this is I think this is a sick show. Again, very artifact or magical item heavy, but so much fun. I love games of D&D or other TTRPGs where you are limited with the powers and abilities that you have, and you have to be creative within those limitations. That's, I think, for me, where campaigns or moments in D&D really shine, where you have to push your creativity to the limits rather than bend the rules and things like that just to make the cool thing happen. I love working within boundaries. A very similar show then to Jackie Chan's Adventures is Xiaolin Showdown, which again, you've got the bad guys and you got the good guys, and they are trying to get magical artifacts that have very unique powers and abilities. Xiaolin Showdown is super interesting because when you go and you find one of these ancient artifacts, I can't remember what they're called, you basically have a showdown where there is some sort of game that you propose to the other person. I think whoever grabs the thing, if you both grab the magical artifact, that's it. If you both grab the magical artifact at the same time, you go into some sort of showdown to battle for it. And one person, I think, or maybe both of you, get to like change or alter the rules of this showdown. You have a cool fight scene with it where you're using the powers of that artifact, stuff like it's cool as hell, okay? And I think they also bend elements. They have some sort of element power created stuff. There's so many cool things. The villain is very tech heavy. The kids all have like a water, wind, or fire powers, all this kind of stuff. Very Avatar, The Last Airbender kind of vibes. There's so many cool things in this show. In terms of world building then, yes, it's kind of set in the everyday world. I think it's primarily set, is it in China? I might be wrong. It's somewhere in nature is where this show is set. And there are a lot of supernatural elements, especially with the way these showdowns take place. The only thing is, the one thing holding me back from also giving it a 4 out of 5 like I did with Jackie Chan's Adventures is that I actually can't remember a lot of the world building in it. Though I know there's a lot in it, because it's not as memorable as Jackie Chan's Adventures, I'm actually going to give it a 3.5 out of 5 for world building. In terms of powers and abilities though, I'm going to rate it higher than Jackie Chan's Adventures, giving it 4.5. Wait, did I give Jackie Chan's Adventures? Yeah, it's higher than Jackie Chan's Adventures. 4.5. Maybe it's, I'm just going to give it a 5. A 5 out of 5 for powers and abilities. I'm going to write that in my notes because is sick as hell. They got avatar powers, but also they got the powers of all these magical artifacts. Very much a magical artifact themed game. And when we get to all the spy shows in just a little bit, you're going to see, first of all, how many spy shows there were in the noughties and 90s, but how often we're going to have to rely on magical items and artifacts in these D&D conversions. In terms of adaptability, pretty easy. I'm going to give it a 4.5 out of 5. Xiaolin Showdown is fairly easy, though you might have to have a few restrictions as a DM. Additionally, as a DM, you're going to have to be making a lot of magical items for this game. So there's a bit of work involved, which is why I'm just lowering it just a tiny bit. And then finally, the story and premise, I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5. I think it's cool. I think it's fun. It's a repetitive theme though. So you're pretty much doing the same thing in every adventure, but it's still very entertaining. So 4 out of 5 for Xiaolin Showdown. Overall, Xiaolin Showdown is going to get a 17 out of 20, also placing it up here in A tier. I'm going to actually move Danny Phantom along here and place Xiaolin Showdown between it and Jackie Chan's Adventures. We've only done 8. It feels like we've done like 50. So we're gonna speed through these now. Redwall is up next. I don't know if any of you know Redwall. Very few people remember Redwall. Redwall is really tragic and really interesting. It's set in like an old medieval time, kind of maybe like the 12th century or something like that, maybe even before then. And it's about this little mouse who's basically lost everyone he has ever known and loved, and has now been brought up or as an orphan in some sort of monastery. There's an old tapestry that tells about some ancient hero and stuff like that, but it's kind of hinted that the tapestry actually foretells the future, and that this little mouse is going to become a cool badass hero one day. But because the monastery is very peaceful and stuff, they don't like to fight. This kid wants to fight everyone. And there's a rat who wants to take over Redwall for some reason. Redwall, I think, is the name of the monastery. He wants to take over the place, and he's scared of the tapestry or something. It's a very classic D&D fantasy-esque setting. But you're kind of playing a bit of a weakling, which is kind of interesting too. The world building of Redwall is one filled with animals. So you're very much going to be using Humble Woods kind of mechanics for this adventure, which I think is really, really fun. It's a nice classic medieval vibe with some supernatural elements here and there, but they're very subtle. Overall, I think the world building is a 4 out of 5 for Redwall. In terms of powers and abilities, you kind of just have the powers of being whatever animal that you are, along with using any weapons and things like that. There's swords and other medieval things in this as well. And again, there's some sort of prophecy element to this. I can't remember if there is magic. I don't think there is. I'm pretty sure it's actually quite grounded in the world. So I'm going to give it a 3 out of 5 for powers and abilities. In terms of adaptability, it's super easy. You're just going to go, I'm going to go with 5 out of 5 actually, because Humblewood exists and because it is already basically a D&D premise here. There's nothing much you have to do apart from make everyone animals. And maybe limit magic. Okay, it could be 4.5 out of 5, but I just think this is such a classic D&D setting. It's just going to immediately get a 5 out of 5. And because it's also probably quite fun to adapt, I'm going to give it a 5 out of 5. Argue with me in the comments. And then lastly, I think the story is really sweet. I think it's an ongoing story. There's a lot of heart to the premise and the world of Redwall. I'm going to give it a 5 out of 5 for a story. This is going to make it a 17 out of 20. Now I'm going to actually put it just behind Xiaolin Showdown. Even though it has the same score as it, I was quite generous with Redwall. And so I'm just going to put it just a little bit behind. Here's a weird one that I don't know if anyone knows about, but I had a VHS tape of this show, maybe even 2 VHS tapes. This is But Ugly Martians.
BKM! 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 BKM!
This is so weird. Look up But Ugly Martians right now and let me know in the comments what you think of it. This is like real old noughties or 90s 3D animation. Weird ass kind of stuff going on. It's kind of psychedelic at times, not in like the physical way. It doesn't look physically psychedelic, but when you're watching But Ugly Martians, you feel like your brain is melting sometimes. So the premise of this, you've got 3 but ugly Martians who have been sent to Earth, which is a futuristic Earth, by the way. It's set in the future, and they've been sent to conquer it. But they end up falling in love with Earth. They love it. Very biker mice on Mars kind of vibe in the way that these guys are. They're very much Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. They love like junk food. They love hoverboards. They don't want to do anything. They just want to hang out with the boys, crack a few brewskis. Like, these are the most chill dudes ever. They're super lazy. They don't want to take over the world. So they're constantly telling their Emperor Zurg or whatever his name is. Emperor Bog is his name. And they're telling Emperor Bog constantly that like, yeah, we just fucking took out this city over here. No problem. The world's going to be conquered in no time. But he is slowly running out of patience. He's also got like this henchman on his side. I think his name is Damage. So his henchman is called Damage. And he secretly wants to like overtake Emperor Bog. And so he's constantly trying to foil these guys so that he can take over the world instead and then get a promotion from Bog. And also like basically fund like his evil experiments and like really powerful monsters. So like he just basically wants to build his whole army so that he can overthrow Bog. It's kind of, that's roughly the premise. You got an evil henchman of a very stupid emperor. Stupid emperor wants these guys to take over the world. Other henchman wants to, oh my god, I'm too convoluted. You're a bunch of dudes trying to take over a planet and you gotta pretend that you are still doing evil things. Overall, the world building is pretty interesting. It's pretty refreshing. You've got Martians, you've got a futuristic Earth. I'm gonna give it a 4 out of 5. In terms of powers and abilities, these guys are essentially useless until they transform. There's a magical anime girl transformation in this where they grow like super suits. And I don't know, I remember watching this show and being unsure as to why they never just transform into their suits all the time. so often they get into these terrible situations that they could have avoided if they just transformed. There doesn't seem to be any limitations as to when or why they can transform. But yeah, 3 out of 5 for powers and abilities. I'm not really sure how they work. I think maybe you could be an all barbarians campaign, and when you rage, you transform. Something like that could be fun. In terms of adaptability, then, I'm going to give it a 3 out of 5 because it's a bit obscure and you're kind of useless outside of using your transformation. There's some other technology in there. There's hoverboards and they got laser guns and stuff like that. I think you could totally make it work. It's just a bit confusing. And then in terms of the story, I actually think it's a really fun premise to be pretending to still be the bad guys and work for a bad guy and just try to like, you're constantly pushing back the tide and trying to convince him like, yeah, we're going to take over the earth. But you know that eventually that's just not going to work anymore and you will have to face this enormous like galactic empire of Martians. So I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5 for story and premise. And so that brings Butt Ugly Martians very fittingly actually to a 14 out of 20, placing it in B tier. B for Butt Ugly. Here's another weird one about science and siblings. Similar to Dexter's Laboratory, we have Johnny Test. I think this actually got a lot of seasons. It got remakes. It was a very popular show. I thought it was fun. I remember being a little disappointed with this show because I was expecting him to be more of a superhero than he actually is. The premise of this show, this kid is the guinea pig of his siblings. The structure of these shows is usually based around this guy, Johnny Test, wanting to make his life a bit more radical. And so he goes to his siblings and is like, hey, can you make me a superhero? Or can you make my dad less lame? Or whatever it is. Siblings, wanting to constantly experiment with stuff, will find some sort of middle ground or compromise and like, yeah, we want to try out this new weird experiment we've made on you. So if you're happy to be our guinea pig here and we're not sure how it's going to go, you're maybe not going to be completely happy. We're not going to be completely happy, but we're going to just find a nice compromise here. And so they make the invention. Usually something weird happens with it, and you adapt in some way to the situation. I'm sure there's an easier way to have explained that all to you, but that's basically the story. I'm going to give the world building here a 1 out of 5. It's just basically our everyday world, but the sisters are kind of super geniuses, and there's a guy who's like a billionaire child, so that's kind of interesting, I guess. In terms of powers and abilities, I'm going to give it 3.5 out of 5, just because it can kind of be anything or everything. It's just based on whatever this guy comes up with, and it's like a Rick and Morty vibe, but like toned down by 4 or 5 stages. Then in terms of adaptability, I'm going to give it a 3.5. Again, very magical item heavy campaign here. But in the end of the day, you're also just playing children. So that's also makes it a little tricky to convert. And then lastly, story and premise, kind of fun. 3 out of 5, I would give it. I think it's like I already struggled to get the story across. Even though the story overall is pretty simple, each episode can kind of be whatever. And I don't know, it's getting a 3.5. It's getting a 3 out of 5 because it just is, okay? That's what I'm rating it. That gives it an overall of 10.5 out of 20. So that's going to go here just in front of SpongeBob SquarePants in C tier. Next up, we have maybe our first S tier campaign premise. And that is in Witch. Witch is a very cool one, not to be compared with Winx, even though they are quite similar. Witch's premise is you've got a bunch of teenage girls who are coming of age and developing cool powers that are all have something to do with the elements. So very Avatar, Last Airbender kind of thing, except not everyone's an airbender, it's just these girls. And they can do a cool anime girl transformation where they kind of get weirdly older for some reason. I don't know why they age when they transform, but they do. They get these costumes and they can use their powers, and I think they're a little stronger when they're in these forms. You've also got this main character, Will, who's drawn here, who has this talisman. She's kind of like the leader figure, and she's being chosen by this talisman. At the start, she doesn't have any powers. Her power is that she can like absorb everyone else's powers and turn it into a super cool laser beam or something like that. I'm pretty sure her powers develop as the show goes on though. But she also, I think, has the ability to have everyone transform. But that's basically it. Magical girl premise, very much. The world building is, again, there is a little bit of everyday world here. That's where everyone has originated from, is in the modern day setting. But there's a lot of cool world building going on here. You do have this whole fantastical world, and there's a revolution happening. There's this other dude in it who's kind of got his own side quest kind of thing going on, where he is trying to usurp some sort of evil ruler. There's a lot of layers to which. I'm going to give it a 5 out of 5 for world building. In terms of powers and abilities, again, Avatar: Last Airbender, in my mind, would get a 5 out of 5 in terms of powers and abilities. So I'm also going to give Witch a 5 out of 5 in terms of powers and abilities. And there's also a nice little twist there where this one girl doesn't really have any powers, but she can utilize her friends. So she's kind of like a bit of a support character. Next, in terms of adaptability, I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5, only because you are limiting your players somewhat as to what they can be. Everyone has got to be a particular element. But I don't think that's necessarily a huge problem, but it is just going to knock it down just a tiny bit, so I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5. And then lastly, the story I think is pretty fun. It's just one kind of ongoing story where they are developing their powers and abilities, they're fighting off evil people, and you know, discovering who they are, discovering more about themselves, discovering the power of friendship and teamwork. It is just a D&D campaign though. In the end of the day, I think it's a solid campaign premise. So I'm going to give it a 5 out of 5 for story. That is going to give Witch a 19 out of 20, making it our very first S-tier campaign. Next on our list is a bit of a weird one. I never watched this, I think because maybe it came out when I was a little bit older and maybe I didn't watch as many cartoons, or maybe it was on, you know, Cartoon Network or whatever, and I didn't have access to like Sky. I only had, you know, access to whatever the TV provider was giving us. We only had like 4 channels. This is Huntik. This is the iconic mascot, I suppose, of Huntik, or the sidekick of the main character in Huntik. Huntik's strange. My fiance got me to watch it, and it's kind of cool. You got a bit of a Digimon, Pokemon vibe in this, where you've got these hunters or whatever. They can utilize these old ancient relics and summon creatures from them, and the creatures fight for them. I think the main character is a bit of an incel. I think that the older cool guy is definitely capitalizing and taking advantage of a young girl's feelings. Another character in it, there's a young teenage girl in it who has a crush on him, but she's really rich, so he's kind of exploiting that so he can constantly get paid. The very rich girl is kind of insufferable and really mean to the main guy and really condescending. Overall, I think all the characters are very flawed, which is actually quite interesting as well. They're all insufferable and kind of terrible people in their own way, which is kind of makes for good storytelling in D&D, not gonna lie. In terms of world building, it's got a very interesting world. I'm gonna give it a 4 out of 5 for world building, though a lot of it is set in modern day world again. That's kind of like an inevitability here in shows like this. They always have to have something for you to latch onto as a kid. In terms of powers and abilities, you just have a bunch of summons. You're summoning loads of these kind of creatures, so I'm gonna give it a 4 out of 5. It's kind of cool though, like you could just say you are a level 1 peasant and you have the ability to summon your actual D&D character, and maybe you have like, everyone's got like 2 or 3 different character sheets. It's the next day. My camera died yesterday, so we're gonna do this again and continue talk about Huntik. But basically, I think that's a pretty cool idea, having multiple character sheets for all your different summons, kind of going into the realm of JoJo having stands or something like that. I think this could be really cool. Like, you yourself are very fragile, but the summons or the D&D characters that you can like bring out onto the field defend you and protect you. So I think that's pretty solid. And all of the creatures aren't like abstract or weird in the way that I don't think it would make, like, I think it would make sense for you to create character sheets for these summons. I think it just really works. I think it really works with this kind of TV show and the kind of characters that are in it. Overall then, for adaptability, I would say because of this, it's pretty easy to do having multiple character sheets and things, but because you have to change the rules and how you would normally play quite a bit, I'm going to just knock it down a peg from a 5 down to a 4. As for then the overall story or premise, I think Huntik it's got a fun, solid story. It's got a continuous story, which is a big one for these TV shows. A lot of them are kind of just once-off, like self-contained episodic things. But Huntik is one of those rare TV shows from my childhood that had a continued story. Obviously, it meant commitment from its audience, but for D&D, I mean, you got plenty of commitment and everyone wants a nice, rewarding, ongoing campaign. So altogether, with 4s across the board, that is going to place Huntik with a 16 out of 20, putting it here at the bottom of the A tier, a low A tier campaign. I'm sorry, Huntik fans, that you're kind of at the far end, but it's okay. The show is fine. I wasn't completely sold in it. I got kind of bored of it after a while. I'm not gonna lie, but it was still pretty fun, and I think it would be a very fun campaign. All right, you all are ready for this next one. This is Super Robot Monkey Team Hyperforce Go. It's so good. I love Super Robot Monkey Team Hyperforce Go. It's sick as hell. It's got loads of inspiration from anime in there for sure across the board. The style, the art style is beautiful. The story is so cool. The premise is amazing. The kind of like depths they go to with this story, like I know lots of people like die often in this show, if I remember correctly. This was one of those shows that it came out a little later in my kind of childhood era, but it blew me away when I saw it. This was the coolest freaking show I had seen in a long time. Basic premise is your main boy, I can't remember his name. Is it Hero? I should have looked this up beforehand. He goes and discovers a big old robot and he gains the powers of primate. So basically ghost monkey powers, and throughout the show he is discovering more and more about what these powers can do, but basically he can like summon a big spectral monkey around him, kind of almost like Sasuke can summon the big like chakra armor around himself. He can summon a giant monkey and like punch people. He can go ape shit literally and tear into people. He's super strong, super fast, all these kind of things. And he also transforms into a cool little costume. On his team then, we also have all these unique monkeys who all have special powers and personality traits and everything else. You've got the smart kind of scientist guy who has drill hands. You then also have a green monkey who's kind of like the comedy relief of the group, but he's also the mechanic of the group, which also in turn makes him the healer because all the monkeys are robots and they fight in a giant robot, so he kind of helps them all and repairs them all and things like that. You have the black monkey who eventually turns into like the silver monkey, who's kind of like the leader, main combatant, fighting general, tactician kind of guy. He's super cool, super badass. Can't remember what his hands turn into. You then have the red monkey, who I think is called Sparks, who has magnet hands, which is very unusual, but he can create electricity and static shock and electrocute people. And then you got the yellow monkey, and she just like punches stuff. She's just really, really powerful and really strong, and is kind of, I guess, more so the DPS of the group rather than the black/silver monkey, who's kind of more the tactician and leader. Overall then, the world building is incredible. It's so good. Like at first when I was rating this, it started off like I was rating it kind of low because I was like, oh, this is just like an everyday city. But no, the city that this is based on is like on a whole other planet. It's set in the future. There's all this beautiful kind of like wild terrain all around the city. It's full of monsters. There's aliens everywhere. But then also you start going into, you know, the robot lore. Obviously, there's really, really rich lore and a history of heroes in this world that fight villains. There's this whole undead lore, so there's like these dark beings from another dimension who eventually transform the guy who will eventually become the villain of this, who's kind of like a lich. The lore of this world, I'm giving it a 5 out of 5. It's so good. It's just like, it's so well thought out. It's such a fun show. You gotta watch this show after this video. In terms of powers and abilities, not only do you have all the cool abilities given to the main character through the power primate, you have all the unique monkeys who all have their cool different weapon hands and stuff like that, and they're all really good at different things. I can very easily see any of these characters being easily converted into a D&D class. But also on top of that, you've got all the kind of dark evil stuff as well in this. You've got that the dark evil undead magic. There's so much that you can break down here. There's so many powers and abilities in this world, so 5 out of 5 again. In terms of adaptability, I'm going to give it a 4.5 out of 10 only because there's kind of robots involved. So I suppose everyone could just be some sort of automaton kind of character, but the fact that a lot of the combat as well revolves around being in a giant Megazord, I'm going to knock it down a few points, but everything else is so easy to convert, so it's being rated also quite highly here. And then the overall story, 100% giving it 5 out of 5. I love this story. The premise is super fun. I mean, it is a bit Monster of the Weeky where you are fighting random kind of monsters every week, but the story does start to get richer and richer as the series goes on, and you bring in characters like who was like the original hero of the world as well, who was friends with the villain who has now become a lich, and he just kind of wants, I think he wants his body back and stuff like that, but he needs the monkeys to do it. There's so many cool villains in this as well. Like, villains also tell an amazing story. The villains are exceptional. The story is really good. Sadly, the whole series actually kind of just ended on a massive cliffhanger. They have said that the creator is going to come back and maybe make a movie or something with this, but we have no idea when that will be and if that will ever happen. So what I kind of like about this is it does leave it open for you to create your version of the ending of this series. I'm so curious if anyone out there has actually heard of Super Robot Monkey Team Hyperforce Go. And if you have, let me know in the comments because I love that show. Overall though, that is going to give Super Robot Monkey Team Hyperforce Go a 19.5. Actually putting it ahead, probably this is one of the highest, at least one of the highest rated shows that we have here. Super Robot Monkey Team Hyperforce Go up here, ahead of which. Now, moving on to a beloved series by I'm sure a bunch of you out there. We have Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends. This is a wonderful show. Strangely like psychedelic show. I know that the creators intended for that. So the premise of the show is based around children creating imaginary friends to tend to their needs. Say if a child is being bullied, they might try to come up with a big scary monster to scare off the bullies and things like that. Eventually though, as these children grow up, they don't need the imaginary friend anymore as they learn to deal with the issues on their own. Or in some cases, maybe they don't like their imaginary friend. Either way, these imaginary friends that were dreamt up into reality now need a place to go and to live. So this place, Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends, is kind of like a retirement home for these imaginary friends. It's run by an old nanny called Mother Foster or something like that, I think her name, or Grandma Foster. And she is running this place with her granddaughter, Frankie. Yeah. Her name is Frankie. And then the main character in this, or the two main characters, I suppose, in this are Mac and Blue. Mac has an imaginary friend called Blue who actually stands out amongst all the other characters here. A lot of the imaginary friends here have very complicated designs. But Blue is just, as you can see, right here, Blue is just a blob. He just looks like that all the time. He barely has any kind of animated features. He is very animated as an individual, but Blue and Mac are best friends. But right now, I'm trying to remember why Blue is going to the Foster's Home. If I can remember correctly, Mac is now going to school, so he can't hang out with Blue. So he's sending Blue to Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends, so that he can spend some time there, be with other people, and have some fun while Mac is in school. But the whole idea is he will never be given away. That's another premise of Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends, is all of these imaginary friends in Foster's Home are eventually kind of like orphans trying to find a new parent, are being given off to new children to look after them and to continue, kind of almost like a Toy Story premise, like, you know, the toys in Toy Story eventually find a new child and things like that. They're looking for a new child to look after. Overall, a really fun premise for a show, and I think this would be such a beautiful campaign. Maybe a shorter one, mind you, but the idea that everyone is playing as an imaginary friend, you all have your own unique abilities and powers and traits, but you're now looking to find a new child, and you all have maybe some sad story or tragic backstory to do with why your child gave you away. Maybe you were incompetent, maybe you couldn't do what they needed you to do, or they simply grew up and never needed you anymore. And so the whole campaign is based around, are you just going to continue living in Foster's home and hanging out with all these other imaginary friends, or are you actively trying to find a child to go and look after? And I think that could be quite beautiful, that eventually, one by one, or maybe towards the end of the campaign, you all have found a child that you will now go after, and you go out into the world and go your separate ways. In terms of powers and abilities, they are a bit more abstract, but I'm still going to give it a 4 out of 5 just because of the sheer variety and possibility that is out there for each imaginary friend to actually have. Looking then at adaptability, I think the one thing you're going to be doing here is you're actually probably all going to be playing as monsters. You're probably going to take monster stat blocks here and using them as your character. You could probably make a character sheet too, but I think it could be more interesting that you're actually playing retired monsters. But there is probably almost no combat involved, and D&D is very heavily combat orientated. This is going to be heavily roleplay focused. And it's going to be a tricky one to know exactly, what mechanics you're going to use here overall. I'm going to give it a 3 out of 5, just knocking it down a little bit because I think there's a lot of muddy area there. Like, this isn't quite the kind of story that you often will play in Dungeons and Dragons, though you could adapt it very easily overall. It's just going to be very unconventional. I mean, a lot of these things on this list are going to be super unconventional, but I'm going to give it a 3 out of 5. I think that is a fair grade to give it. But then finally, in terms of story or like a premise, I think this is a beautiful premise. It is so unique, and I think it would be super memorable for everyone who took part in this game. I'm going to give it a 5 out of 5 for premise. So that is going to leave Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends with a 16 out of 20, placing it again up here in A tier. Now the question is, will I put it ahead of Huntik or not? I think just because it is so unique and fun, I'm going to just put it just that little bit above Huntik, which shared the same score as it. So we're going to put it right there beside each other, just after Denny Phandom. Said I would just get through this quickly, but I've only done like 15 of these so far, and I've already recorded like over an hour and a half of footage. Here's one you probably never heard of, or absolutely hated, or your parents hated it, or looking back at it now, you find it very cringy. I certainly did. This is Super Duper Sumos. They have big butts and guts, and that's the entire premise of this show. The Super Duper Sumos, very strong. They have a transformation sequence as well, where they transform into a slightly bigger, slightly more muscly version of themselves. But 99% of the show is butt jokes. So if you like butt jokes, this might be the campaign premise for you. The world itself of Super Duper Sumos, there is actually, unfortunately, a bit of world building here involved in the world. There are super monsters and everything else. These children went to some sort of strange sensei kind of guy who gave them the weirdest training. I'm actually going to give this a 2.5 out of 5 for world building. In terms of powers and abilities, they don't really have any, apart from the fact that they are superhuman. They are like incredibly strong and have like a magical girl transformation sequence that just makes them a little bigger. But there's nothing unique there. There's nothing fantastical. But still, they do have powers. There is monsters in the world and everything else. I'm going to give it a 3 out of 5. You can see I'm quite reluctant with these scores. This is not like an ideas for a show, but I'm sure you'd have a laugh with it if it was a one-shot or something, baby. If you enjoy poo-poo jokes and big butts and everything else. Then looking at adaptability, it's actually very easy to adapt Super Duper Sumos into D&D. It's just a Monster of the Week kind of show, fighting monsters. You're basically all barbarians, I suppose. Is that the best thing? Because when you go into a rage, then you go into the big muscly mode. Yeah, I guess you're monk barbarians, maybe. Either way, I'm going to give it a 4.5 out of 5. And then in terms of story or premise, okay, look, it is lots of butt jokes, but there is fighting monsters. There's some interesting-ish fights in there. I'm going to give it a 2.5 for premise and story. So overall, this is going to give Super Duper Sumos a 12.5 out of 20. Bringing Super Duper Sumos actually like a C+, I suppose, because my C kind of chart only goes as high as 12, but it's going to be up here as a high C tier campaign. Next up, we have Winx. Winx, again, not to be compared with Witch, or I will anger some fans out there. This one is kind of more school related, I suppose, to Witch up here. So you have a bunch of girls who go to a cool high school for fairy kind of people. And there's also these witches in another school. And like, you know, the show actually, watching it back, it's pretty bad. I don't like it. But it makes for a very, very good campaign premise. In terms of world building, there's a lot of world building in Winx. So many magical worlds and schools and creatures and everything. You got the normal world, but very little of this show actually takes part in the normal world. It's all kind of taking part in this fantasy world. You've got these kind of cyberpunky kind of boys who are also fighters. So again, I'm going to give it a 5 out of 5 for world building, but also for powers and abilities, also going to give it a 5 out of 5 because you're not just limited to the cool powers that the Winx characters get. Like in this as well, I think the Winx literally level up as well. There is progression in their powers. They get stronger and stronger, and they get different ranks as they move through the school and accomplish different feats of power. But alongside that, like I said, there's also a witches school. So there's witches in this world. There's also a boys school that are all kind of combat focused. They use lots of weapons and stuff like that. So you can kind of also play any kind of class or whatever in D&D with this. I will say I'll give it a powers and abilities. I'll give it 5 out of 5 for powers and abilities. For adaptability, I'm also going to give it a 5 out of 5. And then for story or premise, I think the fact that you're in a cool fantasy school is very interesting. I think the factions that exist are also pretty fun. I think that you do progress and actually get more powerful in this show. With the actual show, you get more powerful. And I guess you're trying to achieve, that ultimate rank. But also at the same time, its villains are exceptionally good. All very hot villains, obviously. You have a lot of sexy villains in Winx, so bonus points for that. So actually, Winx is also going to get a 5 out of 5 for story and premise, making Winx the top-rated series that we are going to cover in this video. Winx is going to go up here in S+ tier, SS tier. Crazy powerful, but we have so many to still get through, so stick around as we're gonna go into the craziest stuff, starting with my life as a teenage robot. If anyone watched this was probably your awakening for being attracted to robots. This was probably one of the first crushes I had on a character. This is XJ9, or as she likes to be called, this is Jenny. The whole premise of the show is it's a teenage kind of high school flick, but all the kind of classic teenage gags and issues that you go through are being dealt with by a robot who is suffering them just in robot ways. So if she starts developing pimples, for example, it's just nuts and bolts on her face and things like that. But at the same time, she fights crime and giant monsters and stuff in the big city. So it's overall set in a futuristic version of our reality. And this robot girl goes out and saves loads of people. We also, though, discover later in the show that she is XJ9, but she has had other variations. There's also XJ1 and 2 and 3 and 4, all the way up to 8. These are all her sisters. And so I think what would be a fun premise for this, even though the 2 boys in this show are kind of like also her teammates and stuff, I think what would be more interesting is if you are all playing, different versions of XJ whatever, and are all just teenagers trying to get by in this high school kind of world. I think that's the best way to go about this as a D&D campaign. In terms of world building, I'm going to give it a 3 out of 5. It's fine. In terms of powers and abilities then, this is a weird one because you only kind of have robot powers. And I think actually more so, a lot of it involves the upgrades that you get from your creator. So actually, I think it's going to be a very magical heavy, like magic item heavy campaign. I'm going to give it a 2 out of 5 for powers and abilities. There's kind of not much going on that she can do. She learns new things, but I think overall, I don't know. This is a tough one. Maybe I'll give it a 3 out of 5. In terms of adaptability then, I guess you're playing all Warforges. Yeah, it can work. A 3 out of 5. And then in terms of the overall story, I would say this is kind of fun, but I don't think it'll be very fun for very long. I think it works as a very short campaign. I'm going to give it 3 out of 5 again for story or premise. And that is going to give a total of 12 out of 20 for My Life as a Teenage Robot, placing it in like a high C tier, but actually behind Super Duper Sumos, to my own disappointment. So one thing I tried to avoid with this is try to avoid like superhero, like Marvel and DC TV shows. So I didn't go into like Spider-Man and Fantastic Four and X-Men and all of those. I feel like that deserves like its own video to go into Marvel shows and things like that, and make them their own thing. But there is one show that I absolutely adored as a kid. This show is the embodiment of, I don't know if any of you did this when you were a kid, when you're kind of on road trips and driving along and you imagine a character kind of skating along the telephone poles and doing like cool backflips and everything else while you're like driving in the car. I still do that every now and then to this day. But Static Shock was literally that character. Static Shock surfed on telephone poles and he was the coolest fucking superhero of all time. And I think what they did really well in Static Shock is not only cover some very interesting political topics, and they go into more so in the actual comic books themselves, but they really covered like his high school life and his real life very well. And I think that is a really interesting twist. Like obviously Spider-Man does this to some extent, but I actually think Static Shock does this a little better, where he is just dealing with a lot of everyday problems. Whereas also there's a lot of cool superheroes that came out of an event called the Big Bang. So at one stage there was this big chemical explosion. Static Shock was caught in this, and everyone who was caught in this chemical explosion got weird powers like control fire. But most of these characters became villains. This is an interesting one to also try to cover as a D&D campaign. This is where it gets maybe a little complicated because the show is pretty much based around Static Shock. Everyone's going to want to be Static Shock. So this is the problem you face when you're covering like a superhero premise like this. And because it's in the world of DC as well, it kind of means, you know, one person could be Batman, one person could be Green Arrow, etc. So it's a tricky one to turn into a premise without it just becoming these other shows, without it becoming Batman meets Static Shock. And Static Shock also had loads of crossover series as well with other things. I think maybe he met like the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. That might be wrong. He met loads of characters. He went into lots of different worlds. So the only thing about this is, how do you make this a campaign about Static Shock while also like not including too many other superheroes from other places, so it doesn't feel like Static Shock anymore? I think a cool way to do it is to all play superheroes who are admired when they are a superhero, but when they are not a superhero, when they are in their everyday life, either they're dealing with some sort of like prejudice or political issues as well, like discrimination. I think that would be really interesting to go into. You are admired when you're saving the world, but when you're not, you're dealing with some really real shit. This campaign premise would be that you are all survivors of this big chemical explosion and have come out the other side with superpowers. And do you become villains or do you become heroes? And I think, balancing that, like walking that tightrope, could be very interesting and engaging for a D&D premise where the world is against you and you kind of want to hit the world back because it has punished you so much. But Static Shock has decided to be a hero despite everything. And he does so with a smile and being super badass and super cool and everything. I don't know. I hope I've got that right. I might have. Let me know in the comments if you disagree with me or you think it should be tweaked in any way. But based on my nostalgia and memories and everything else, I feel like that would be the most interesting way to go about this. Overall, though, I think the world of Static Shock is basically the DC world, so it's not like super original in that way. I'm going to give it a 3 out of 5 just for world building. Obviously, when you're looking at DC, the world building is incredibly vast, but to then separate it to just Static Shock's world, I think it's much more focused on just our world and the problems of our everyday world. So there's nothing too interesting in that regard, but it is a very cool world to experience. In terms of powers and abilities though, there's so many powers that have come out of this chemical explosion. I'm gonna give it a 5 out of 5 just because there's such a variety here. Though you are kind of limited to kind of, I guess, one type of power, but I don't think that's a problem. In terms of adaptability in here, I think a lot of superhero premises maybe struggle to some degree with this. You do have to limit people on what they can do. And D&D is a funny one when you're trying to accommodate for very unique powers. Like, I am the lightning electricity guy. Like, you could be like a storm cleric, sure, but there's a lot of weird things that don't make sense to. You can't completely do all the cool electric things. It requires a lot of reflavoring of powers and abilities. So I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5 for adaptability. In terms of story then, I actually think this is a really beautiful story and premise to cover. There is a lot of everyday stuff that you'd have to deal with too in this world. And I think it's really interesting that, you've got your character sheet that says you can do all these things, but you basically have to ignore all your powers and abilities sometimes when you're in the everyday life, when you're not pretending to be a superhero. I think this would be really, really fun. I think this is a really solid premise. And I think what really backs it up is the really real stuff that Static Shock has to deal with in his everyday life. So this is going to give it a 17 out of 20, making it an A-tier campaign. So I'm actually going to it's just behind Jackie Chan. And if I had to decide between Xiaolin Showdown and Redwall or where to put Static Shock, I'm going to put it between Xiaolin Showdown and Redwall. Okay, we're getting into the spy section of this video. There were so many spy shows in the noughties and the 90s. And one of the biggest ones that stuck with me was Totally Spies, and Kim Possible as well, but we'll get to Kim Possible later. Now, Totally Spies had a lot of issues, but we're not going to get into those in this video. That is not going to be a part of this D&D premise. But Totally Spies World, to give you a breakdown of it, you've got these teenage girls who are spies, and they go out and they do missions that usually revolve around them needing to use their knowledge of kind of teenagey girl things. Like, a lot of their villains might be someone who's gonna ruin the makeup industry and have makeup mutate your face, or the fashion industry. You're gonna have strangling clothes and things like that. And their knowledge of fashion and makeup and everything else gives them an edge on these missions. And I actually really loved Totally Spies growing up. Overall though, in terms of world building, Totally Spies is pretty much identical to our own, apart from the fact that there is a secret spy organization for these girls. And I guess the villains are just, billionaire, philanthropist, evil kind of people. So basically the same as our world. It is a little different. You got cool spy stuff, so I'm gonna give it a 1 out of 5 for world building. In terms of powers and abilities then, the actual main 3 girls, they don't have any powers necessarily. They're kind of good at certain sports and maybe gymnastics and things like that. And they have some knowledge of fashion and makeup and stuff. But overall, the main powers and abilities from this come from the gadgets that they get every game. So in every mission they go on, they get a set of very specific weapons that are also teenage girl theme, laser makeup or whatever. So every session, the DM will probably have to make up custom magic items for you for that game. And that's primarily where you get your powers and abilities from. You're probably never leveling up in this, to be fair. You're probably going to be staying as a level 1 monk or whatever, or a fighter, or whatever you like. But in terms of powers and abilities, I'm going to give it a 3.5. The overall gadgets and gizmos that you get are really cool and very creative. And so I think it deserves some praise for that. But there is no real magic system in this world or powers and abilities. In terms of adaptability, then there is a lot of things you have to change. For example, you could level up as your characters. You could level up in rogue and stuff. There's no magic in this world, though, number one. Everyone's going to play as humans as well. And a lot of work is on the DM to make these unique magic items. I'm going to give it a 2.5 or a 3. I'm going to say a 3 out of 5 in terms of adaptability. And then finally, for story or premise, I think it's pretty fun. I think this is a very fun premise. I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5 for story or premise. So that is going to place Totally Spies somewhere. I think in the low C tier-ish, it's 11.5. Jimmy Neutron got a 9. SpongeBob SquarePants got a 10. So it's gonna place it right in the middle of C tier, just after Johnny Test and before My Life is a Teenage Robot. It's shaping up to be a nice juicy wall behind me now. I'm pretty proud of it. We've covered 20 so far. We have 30 left. We're almost at the halfway mark. But as well, if you want to take a break from this and check out any of my other videos, I made a bunch of like skill tree videos and things like that help adapt a lot of these shows and series into D&D. Using my classless system that I have made, you'll be able to convert a lot of these very easily into a D&D campaign. Just a little tip. If you want to check out any of those, I'll link them up here in the description below. I think that'd be fun to check out. So next up is Kids Next Door, another spy show. We're going to cover a bunch of spy shows here with Kim Possible up next. But Kids Next Door, the premise is you are a bunch of kids who are terrified of growing up and you are constantly battling against basically the concept of aging and becoming an adult. So every villain in Kids Next Door, every problem they face, these are all things that symbolize adulthood and growing up, which is really fun and really cool. And like the whole like heart of this comes from like, even when you do grow up, you know, maintain that childhood wonder, maintain your imagination and your sense of fun and play and everything else. And I think it's a wonderful message to teach kids in the end of the day. In terms of the world building though, the world building is sick as hell. Like, yes, it's set in our everyday life, but they've gone into the world of like children and stuff, like so deeply. There's so many different factions and teams of children that are all organized as spies, like across all these neighborhoods and all over the world. There's this other kind of weird supernatural being called like Father or the Father or something like that. I don't even know what he is really. But he's like this dark, shadowy dude who can like burn things and stuff. He's got straight up superpowers. There's aliens in this. There's so many crazy supernatural things. But also the creators of the show have so much fun with just being imaginative. They had these art kind of shows as well, where they just gave complete artistic control to these wonderful creatives, where they just did some wild kind of crossover things. There's like some anime premises and everything else. This is just such a fun show. I think the world building here, again, it's in the everyday, like modern day life, but they've changed it so much. I actually want to give this a 5 out of 5, but I think based on my own rules that I've given the rating of these things, I guess it kind of needs to be a 4 out of 5. I'm going to find a middle ground here and give it a 4.5 out of 5. In terms of then powers and abilities, again, because it's a spy show, the kids actually have very little powers and abilities, but the inventions that they create are so much fun and kind of low-key seem to almost be powered by their imagination. Like there's I think the main dude, number 1, he's got like one of his signature things that he always has is like a gun that just has like a chili inside it, but somehow it allows him to just like have infinite ammo of like a chili beam gun that just does devastating damage to people. So like realistically, a chili inside a tube on like a water pistol should not work as a weapon, but there is some sort of level here of their imagination making things work. And I think that's super cool and super fun. I'm going to go to a 4 out of 5 for powers and abilities. In terms of adaptability then, I actually think there's a lot more systems out there that would support Kids Next Door better than D&D, though you can obviously make D&D work for almost anything because it's such a big sandbox game. This is why people enjoy D&D 5e so much, is because how flexible the rules actually are. But if you're gonna go play this, I'd actually recommend maybe checking out Break RPG, specifically because there is a species in that series, which is a goblin, and they have this ability to kind of make any item they want. They can make any invention they want, but it is solely based on their own imagination. And as soon as they stop focusing on it, it just kind of falls into scrap pieces and stuff like that. So I think that would be a really fun concept, even just to take for Kids Next Door as like a D&D campaign or whatever campaign you run in, whatever system. You could also do kids on bikes here as well. That could be a fun one as well to work with. I don't know. I think there's a lot of other systems that outside of D&D that would just give this like, it would do it more justice. So I'm going to give it a 3 out of 5. It's not impossible to transfer this into D&D, but I think you're better off actually just going with a different system. And then in terms of the story, there's so many wild directions they go with this. Amazingly, Kids Next Door, despite like the premise being kind of like low-key limited, I think it makes for a really good campaign. And I think what really sells it for me here, to give it a 5 out of 5 for a story or premise, is the show ends in such a beautiful way. And I think it really encapsulates the kind of campaign you should write and create if you're a DM running a Kids Next Door campaign, that you do end it. And you end it with these kids growing up and how they are going to deal with that. And, you know, battling with it constantly every day, that they are aging and that this like version of their life is going to come to an end one day. Like there's an episode as well, where is it number 2? I think she's turning 12. So she's like, I'm basically an adult now. So I think that was really fun. Having like a timer as well, like tracking months and years and everything in your campaign, I think it'd be really, really fun with this. So, but also maybe when you level up, maybe that is you aging as well. So when you eventually get to a certain level, you're going to be too old to actually be an adventurer or like a spy or whatever in the future. So you're kind of like enjoying getting more powerful, but eventually you're going to be out of the campaign. The campaign's going to end. I think this deserves a 5 out of 5 for a premise. So overall, this gives it a 16.5 out of 20, which is going to place it, again, in an A-tier campaign. And I believe Danny Phantom got the same score as this one, but I think I'm going to actually place it just above Danny Phantom. I think it deserves it. I think Kids Next Door did such an exceptional job of creating such a good show, and I think everyone loved this as a premise. And I think it's actually got a bit more longevity to it than Danny Phantom. So we're going to put it ahead of Danny Phantom in A tier. And for anyone out there wondering, hey, what's going on with D tier? Why ain't there anything in D tier down here? Well, the next one is unfortunately going into D tier. Despite the fact that I adored this show, I do not think that Kim Possible overall makes for a very good D&D premise. In terms of world building, there is none really. There's nothing supernatural necessarily in the world that I remember. It is just our everyday world, and Kim Possible, though, is kind of doing some superhero-y spy stuff in it. So I'm actually going to give Kim Possible's world building a 0 out of 5. In terms of powers and abilities, it's a very similar situation to Totally Spies, only I think actually the powers and abilities, or the gadgets, I suppose, that you get, which are the powers and abilities in this, are less interesting than Totally Spies. You've got like a grapple hook, maybe smoke bombs or something like that. You don't actually have many cool gadgets in Kim Possible. She's kind of just more of a badass and gets by with her cheerleading powers more than anything. So I'm actually going to give the powers and abilities in this a 2 out of 5. I'm kind of boosting them up even a little more just because Shigo exists and is a thing. In terms of adaptability, yeah, sure, you can adapt it, but there's not going to be any magic, and it's going to be very limited as a campaign. I'm going to say like a 3 out of 5, and I think that's actually being quite generous. And then in terms of a story or premise, again, it's very similar to Totally Spies, only I think washed down a bit. And this is not to say that this is a lesser show than Totally Spies. This is more so in terms of making it a D&D campaign and making it interesting for your players. I think Kim Possible is less unique in that regard and has less to bring to the table. However, I do think, even though it's going to be rated much lower, I think Kim Possible is overall a better show and is one of my favorite shows here. And you're going to see later on, probably my favorite show out of all of these is actually going to end up in poopy tier. But overall, that gives Kim Possible a 7 out of 20, making it our very first D tier campaign. We have a banger coming up now. This one I haven't watched personally. I've watched like 1 or 2 episodes and I was very impressed, but I never watched this as a kid, mainly because I think it looked ugly. But my fiance actually helped me rate this one. Do not bombard her in the comments for what she rated it. I think she likes it a lot. We worked together to put it together, this one. But this is Code Lyoko, which is such a cool premise for a series. The premise for Code Lyoko is that you have a bunch of kids with massive foreheads who discover this big supercomputer like hidden away somewhere. And within this computer, there is some, I think, so this is based off as well what my fiance has told me. This is what I've interpreted. So I might have things wrong here. Correct me in the comments if I am wrong. But from what I understand, there is a big sentient kind of like program in this computer that is trying to get out into our world and cause problems. And so the kids go into this cyberspace, this cyber world, and try to deal with different kind of like viruses and problems in the world, so that the machine doesn't destroy our world. But come the end of the episode, and if they manage to defeat whatever problems are inside the computer, everything will then reset in the entire world, which is crazy. But overall, you've got a little bit of high school stuff. Most of the stuff that takes place in this, though, it does take place in the cyberpunk world. Though I do think a lot of the world building, as cool as a premise as it is, I think the world building is just a little lackluster, whereas the world just feels quite empty when they actually go into it. It's really, really cool overall, but I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5 here in terms of world building. I just think that there could be more. I think this is more out of me just wanting more from the show. I wanted and maybe they're limited by the technology or whatever, but I do feel like the world that they go into could have been cooler just to experience. In terms of powers and abilities then, they don't have anything exceptionally like remarkable or memorable in my opinion. They all have like a unique weapon that they're kind of good at using, but they don't have any like kind of crazy superpowers. There's not much of a magic system in here. Later on there is another character introduced, and she can kind of speak with the code, and she can like turn off these beacons or whatever that they have to deal with later, whatever. She's kind of like a weird caster. But other than that, there's nothing super exceptional. I'm going to give it a 3.5 out of 5 for powers and abilities. In terms of adaptability then, similarly, because of the types of powers and abilities that are here, it's a bit of a weird world. I'm going to give it a 3.5 out of 5 in terms of adaptability. It's easily done, but it's also probably got quite a few limitations. But then finally, for story and premise, if I could rate it higher, I would. I'm going to give it a 5 out of 5 for story and premise here, because I think regardless of where it's going here on the board, I think this is a banger premise for a campaign, even just to draw ideas and inspiration from. I think the idea of a world resetting every session that you play is super cool, so long as you manage to defeat, whatever bad guy or villain is causing problems. I think the idea of going into like a cyber world where you actually play as your D&D character is really cool. And when you're outside of there, you're just playing a basic peasant character. You don't have any like stats necessarily. I think that's really fun. But Code Lyoko gets a 16 out of 20, placing it again up here in the A tier. We have a lot of A tier stuff in this video. Should I put it in front of Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends, in front of Huntik, or at the very back? I think I want to place it in front of Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends and Huntik. I do really love the premise of Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends. This just feels more D&D campaign-y. I think this might be the first time where I'm actually going to just place them on the same level. I don't know where to put them yet. Maybe put in the comments which one you would rate higher. Would you rate Huntik higher, or would you, no, not Huntik. Would you rate Code Lyoko higher, or would you rate Foster's Home from Imaginary Friends? I think this is totally based on preference. If you prefer role play or if you prefer more action. I think just for this episode alone, actually, and the fact that we're looking at D&D, the fact that D&D is more combat heavy, we're actually going to put Code Lyoko in front of Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends. As cool as a premise as Code Lyoko is, I actually think I might prefer a Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends campaign. I really enjoy role-play games and running D&D games that are very role-play heavy. So my preference would be actually for Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends. But like I said, anything on this tier list you can totally run as a D&D campaign. And again, I'm challenging you to tell me how all of these lower ones could be run and how you would run them as a campaign. Okay, so next up on our list, you know them, you love them, is the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. These were the coolest dudes growing up, eating pizza, saving the world, fighting Shredder. Like, they're so iconic. They're absolutely brilliant. The Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, I know, inspired so many other TV shows. Everyone was trying to achieve what the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles had managed to achieve. If you don't know what Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles is, it's about 4 turtles who are mutated by kind of slime or whatever, turned into humanoid turtles, and then were trained by another humanoid rat character who taught them like martial arts and things. And now They live in the sewers and they fight crime. And that's the whole premise. Other versions of the show, because it has been remade again and again and again, go crazy with the story. And the world of the Teenage Mutant Ninja... That is so hard to say. And the world of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles is so vast and so deep. There's other dimensions, there's beings from other planets and everything. It's a crazy world. I love the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and people keep doing more and more fun stuff with it. So I'm actually going to give the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles a 4 out of 5, maybe even 4.5 out of 5 here for their world building. The only knocking a few points because in the end of the day, it is just New York City that most of the adventure takes place in. In fact, I'll bring it down to a 4 just because the majority of the story takes place in New York, especially with the original show that I grew up on, but then later interpretations of the show really expand on other worlds and things like that and go pretty crazy. Similarly, the powers and abilities of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles have developed over time, and they can do some really cool stuff now in more modern day interpretations, whereas before, they just had a few weapons. Some of them were a bit smarter than others, some was more of a leader character, as a jokester, tough guy, whatever. But nowadays, they can do some crazy superpower kind of stuff. In terms of powers and abilities, like I said, the kind of earlier thing would probably get a 3 out of 5, but I think just for this, if you are going to play a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles campaign today, I think there's a lot of other things to draw on, a lot of other aspects than just having a stick for a weapon or like a katana for a weapon, things like that. They have other powers now that you could incorporate. And so for powers and abilities, I'm actually going to give it a 4 out of 5. And then also, in terms of adaptability, I think it's very, very easy. I'm actually going to give it a 4.5 out of 5, just because the only limitations here are maybe cutting back on magic somewhat, potentially, maybe even not if you're using some more modern day interpretations, and the fact that everyone has got to be a turtle. Now, I had a chat with my fiance about this, and we talked about how there is potentially a bunch of other characters you could play as in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. But, you know, you could be Rocksteady or Bebop or whatever. You could be some other mutated animal. You could be an alien. You could be their friend with a hockey mask as well, who's just a human. But I think in the end of the day, if you're not all playing Ninja Turtles or Turtles in D&D, it's not gonna be really the Teenage Mutant... Fuck, I can't say that fast. I think, though, in the end of the day, if you're not all playing... Ninja Turtles in D&D, like Monk Turtles or something like that, or Fighter Turtles or whatever, it's not gonna really be a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle campaign if you're not all agreeing to be the Turtles. So the only restriction I would give it is the fact that you all will have to be Turtles for this to actually be a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle campaign. In terms of story then and premise, I think it's a fun one. You know, there's so much you can go into with this world. It has a vast world to explore. It's got vast story beats as well. You know, you've again got incredible villains in the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle universe, Shredder obviously being one. And again, if you didn't have Shredder as a villain, what are you doing? So I think there's a lot of fun you can do with this. I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5 for its story or premise. And so that's going to give Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles a 16.5 out of 20, which puts it up there again into another A-lister between or somewhere around Danny Phantom and Kids Next Door. And I'm just trying to think where I'd put it. And I think I'd put it actually before Kids Next Door and Danny Phantom, putting it before all of them because I just think it's so iconic. So bam, right up there, just behind Redwall, even though I think you'd actually probably have more fun with a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles campaign, simply because like everyone knows Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and that kind of puts it up there really. Like I think the more popular a TV show is, the more hype you're going to build around this actual game. Next up is a show that I think a lot of you probably really like. I get the sense that a lot of my audience probably really likes Ben 10. I was actually a little bit too old for Ben 10. I was not 10 years old when I was watching Ben 10. And I remember when I was, I think maybe 13, maybe even 14, I had asked, like my aunt was asking like what we want for Christmas. And I was like, I want a Ben 10 watch, because I still think they're cool as hell. So I had a Ben 10 watch when I was a little too old for it, but it was such a cool show and such a fun premise. World building in Ben 10, it's got to be a 5 out of 5. crazy aliens, multiple planets, incredibly deep lore, factions, it's got it all. So Ben 10, 5 out of 5 for world building. In terms of powers and abilities, the whole premise of Ben 10 is about the powers and abilities of all the unique aliens and everything. 5 out of 5, 100% 5 out of 5. In terms of adaptability then, I think this is where it gets a little lower on the score. It could get a bit higher, but the premise that I am pitching to you now, if you wanted to run a Ben 10 campaign, I think you should all potentially be playing druids. Now hear me out, you can't actually wild shape into anything. You are given a very strict list of things you can transform into. I think another fun approach to this is that you could potentially play any kind of class in D&D, but everyone in the party, because it's only going to be fun if you're all Ben 10, right? So we're going to tweak it a little bit and we have to bend the show a little bit. So it's going to lose some points here because we're losing the original show, I suppose. But what we're going to do is that every person has a limited list of creatures or monster stat blocks that they can transform into. And maybe as you level up, or as you discover specific magic items, like maybe a memory chip or something that you can insert into your Ben 10 watch to add new creatures to it, you will slowly accumulate more and more transformations. And these transformations are what are going to really help you in terms of combat or getting through certain puzzles and all this kind of stuff. So imagine being able to turn into a shadow and sap the strength of a monster. Or imagine being able to be, I don't know, like a will-o-wisp and just be able to fly or use the flying speed of that. You know, there's a lot of potential in all the creatures that exist in D&D, and I think they would make really fun transformation abilities. And so Ben 10 is going to get a 4 out of 5 for adaptability, only because of those restrictions. And then in terms of a show and a premise and the story overall, Ben 10 is hella fun. It's going to get a 5 out of 5 because, like, who the hell doesn't want to play a Ben 10 adventure? That is going to give Ben 10 a 19 out of 20. So putting it right here in S tier. Now, folks, we have one more SS tier, another 20 out of 20, and that is in He-Man. He-Man's world building goes hard. I don't know if you watch He-Man, but that shit's crazy. He-Man has like the craziest world building and lore, and if you watch any also of the modern versions of He-Man, this is a fucking crazy show. You know, not only have like Skeletor and all the fantasy stuff as well, you got all these cyborg things in there. The world where He-Man is set is actually at the center of its own universe, and it gives power to all these other worlds out there as well, which is actually the premise of my own homebrew world, funnily enough. Gostar is like the center of all universes in the multiverse. It's just, He-Man just goes so crazy. The powers and abilities, they're so varied. There's so many characters you could also play in a He-Man campaign. It's so easy to adapt into a D&D campaign. There's so many people you could be. Obviously, there's a whole cast of characters who help He-Man as well. But then also in terms of the story and premise, it's like infinite. I mean, the main premise is you're constantly defending Grayskull, this magical tower from Skeletor. But I think just that the levels you can go to here with the story, and especially with some of the more modern interpretations of He-Man that really expand the world a little bit and explore in stories and adventures like the potential that these worlds have. It really shows like how boundless a campaign premise He-Man is. He-Man is going right up there in S tier. I think even though it's like kind of a crappier show, I think it's actually going to go beyond Winx. So we're actually up here in the top of the list. I don't even know if you can see it anymore, but He-Man has gone above and beyond, up there in the stars in a whole new category. So for anyone who is familiar with Totally Spies, may have also known about this other show, Martin Mysteries, that I'm pretty sure is done by the same animation team. And Martin Mysteries, even the team of Martin Mysteries, I'm pretty sure they all have the same like color palettes as the three girls from Totally Spies. There's a lot of weird similarities there. There's also some other weird stuff in this show. But this premise is very much like it's a monster of the week where this team goes out and it's kind of like a Goosebumpsy vibe. They're trying to solve some sort of mystery to do with something scary. It is like a kids horror TV show. He doesn't really have any powers. One of his teammates is like a friend from high school and the other one is a caveman, I think. He's just really strong. Martin has this watch where he can get a bunch of different tools. Originally, I thought he had the ability to, as a kid, I thought he had the ability to fabricate anything he wanted with his watch, but I'm pretty sure he just has a select few tools that he can use. And nothing's crazy. Like, one is for taking samples of like liquids and stuff, and he can put it in this thing and it'll tell him what it is. So like, it's like, oh, this is bog water or whatever. He's actually pretty smart. He's also insufferable as a character. There's no real powers and abilities here. The world building's pretty interesting because you've got all these mythologies and everything else all mashed into one world, and they're exploring these things. And then in terms of adaptability, you could kind of make it work, but none of the characters have really any powers, and I think this is just a kind of light-hearted Call of Cthulhu campaign where no one's really going insane. It's just a bit more fun, but no one's got any exceptional powers, but you are dealing with monsters and creatures beyond your capabilities that you can't really take out, but you've got to figure out how to defeat them without just like brutally smashing them with an axe again and again like you do in D&D. In terms of world building, Martin Mysteries is going to get a 4 out of 5. In terms of then powers and abilities, I'm only going to give it a 2 out of 5. Like, he's got a cool watch and one guy's a caveman, but other than that, there's nothing really going on for these guys. In terms of adaptability then, I'm going to give it a 2.5. Like, you can adapt anything into D&D really. But you kind of are better off running a Call of Cthulhu game with this particular premise. And then finally, the story, I'm going to give like a 3.5. I think it's fun going out and hunting different monsters and spooky guys. I think there's a lot to explore there. But in terms of longevity, there's no real... I don't think there's a continuous villain necessarily. I might be wrong. Let me know in the comments if I am remembering this wrong. And from what I've looked at and what I've researched, I couldn't find the main villain. But again, let me know if I'm wrong. Overall, this is going to give Martin Mystery a 12 out of 20, placing it here in C tier. I do think it has more potential than My Life as a Teenage Robot, so I'm actually going to put it just ahead of that. But unfortunately, it's still behind Super Duper Sumos. And so now we discover the flaws in my rating system, because somehow, even though it should kind of be in poopy tier, Super Duper Sumos is still ahead of Martin Mysteries. Speaking of creepy shows though, Courage the Cowardly Dog was one of the darkest TV shows for kids that I had ever experienced. I don't know what your experience was of Courage the Cowardly Dog, but it was freaky as fuck. So the whole premise is this little dog is in a shack in the middle of nowhere with 2 senile old people, and occasionally they're like attacked by monsters and aliens, and there's weird, really dark, haunting kind of adventures that this poor guy goes on. He has no powers or abilities, not capable in any way. He's absolutely terrified of everything as well. His name is Courage, but that is like, there's nothing courageous about him. But I suppose in a way, despite how scared he is, he keeps pushing through. It's almost like his fear and his need to survive. And also look after the only 2 people he has in his life is what pushes him to do the right thing and to somehow save the day every single time. Courage the Cowardly Dog has fuck all powers. He is kind of just useless. He has less abilities than a regular human, but still somehow he takes on eldritch beings constantly. World building of Courage the Cowardly Dog is going to be pretty high. I'm going to rate it a 4 out of 5, and I think it's pretty clever, and I'm not sure how intentional it was when they were making this show, but I heard somewhere about a theory that the reason Courage's world, like outside the shack, is just a barren desert is because dogs have no memory of places they've been, so they don't know what is beyond that shack, for example. So occasionally Courage will be brought to places that don't seem like they fit in the world that he's currently in, because like the shack that's there, it's like he's in some sort of like Fallout world where these are the only survivors of like a nuclear war. But he does go to some modern day places occasionally. And you're like, why is that the case? But apparently, yeah, that is how he envisions the world beyond the house, because he can't, he has no recall of these places he's been. So it's just a barren wasteland outside the place they're living. I don't think that was intentional, but it's kind of a cool idea. I don't know if that made any sense. And then in terms of powers and abilities, I've written down here that it should be 2, but I don't think he's got any powers. In fact, he has less powers than an actual human. So I'm actually going to rate it 0 out of 5. In terms of adapting, you could all play as dogs, I suppose, and use the dog stat in D&D. But that's kind of it, really. The problems that are here cannot really be resolved through combat most of the time. It's problem solving and stuff like that, which is why I think Call of Cthulhu is a much better fit for this as a premise. I'm going to give it a 1 out of 5 in terms of adaptability. But then in terms of the story, I think it really, Courage the Cowardly Dog really captures this creepy vibe. And I think it's a really fun premise, being so pathetically useless and still having to go up against the most extreme of villains that are probably even beyond what you've played against in most of your D&D campaigns. Like, these are unkillable beings and ghosts. I also have so many memories of the older couple he's with often being possessed or turning against him, which really removes that kind of safety net. They're kind of the only people he can kind of rely on. And those individuals also start to turn on him very often. And that really messed with me as a kid. Like, his safety net is gone many, many times over. I think I'm going to give it like a 3 out of 5, maybe 3.5 out of 5 for story or premise, making it like a high ranking D campaign, giving it 8.5 altogether. Again, though, I don't think this is a bad idea for a story. I just think that it might be better, say, in Call of Cthulhu or something else. You can make anything work here. Transformers Robots in Disguise is next, and this was the coolest show as well. They're all cool. I didn't actually watch enough Transformers as a kid, but my neighbors, they had like Sky as well, where they had loads of different channels, and often when I'd go over there as a kid, I'd watch a bit of Transformers, and damn, the world building in this, the stories, they go hard. Like, there's some dark stuff as well, where I know characters are like dying by the end of like the story. They're all in space. I remember like Optimus Prime disintegrating and stuff and be like, what main character is dead now? So Transformers for world building, 5 out of 5, 100%. In terms of powers and abilities, they can transform into vehicles. That's pretty cool. They got laser guns, they got jets and rocket launchers. If they transform into a car, like, I talked to him again about this with my fiance, and we were talking about how it's kind of cool. If you were to adapt this into D&D, basically you are choosing between combat and utility. So when you switch into a vehicle, you gain a lot more utility, you get a lot more movement. If you are like a forklift, for example, you got forklift powers now. Or if you're a jet, you can fly and you've got missiles maybe and stuff like that. So you substitute your combat prowess for utility. And I think that's kind of a cool premise. I'm not entirely sure how you would make that work. But in terms of powers and abilities, I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5. In terms of adaptability then, I think I'm also going to give it a 4 out of 5. However, from what I understand about Lancer, where you are building your own mech, you're adding different add-ons and powers onto that mech and things that it can do, I actually think a Lancer might work here to help you run a Transformers game. Again, I haven't ran Lancer, I've only read a little bit about it. So, but from my understanding, it's kind of perfect for Transformers. If there's another game out there, another TTRPG out there that would work, let me know. And then finally, in terms of story, I think Transformers deserves a 5 out of 5. There's a reason they have made so many movies about Transformers. There's a reason there's so many different TV shows and things about Transformers. Transformers has so much potential and so much fun available to players and things like that. You can kind of turn it into anything, but the premise, the powers, and just the general idea of being a giant robot in a human world who can transform and hide as vehicles, I just think that's super cool and super unique. It's going to put it at the top of A tier here for me as a very, very good A tier campaign. Now, keeping in theme with the idea or the concept of beings from another planet and a bit of tech stuff and vehicles and such, we have Biker Mice from Mars. Another one I didn't watch a lot, but my fiance showed me a few episodes of it. We did a bit of research together and she also helped me rate this one specifically. This is really fun. This is a really fun show. A lot of people kind of like bash it quite a lot for like not being kind of completely original, and I see why. Like, it's very similar to Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles in a way, in just the way they act. They're just cool dudes who just want to hang out. And they got bikes. They got sentient bikes, apparently. I said that to my fiance, that they have sentient bikes. And she was like, what? No, the bikes aren't sentient. Apparently they are, because I watched an episode where they fell through a tree and left their bikes behind. And then their bikes came over to the tree looking concerned. If a bike can look concerned, these bikes looked concerned when the Biker Mice fell into the tree, into a giant hole in the ground. So, summarizing Biker Mice from Mars, they're from Mars, and Mars was taken over by these kind of fish alien people who exploit planets for all their resources. And there was a whole war that went on before this show even began between these fish people and the biker mice. Pretty much all the other biker mice were killed. I don't know if they're biker mice, I just think they're mice people or Martians or whatever you want to call them. They were all wiped out except for these 3 biker mice who were escaping. When the show starts, they are escaping that slaughter fest that went on their planet. And of course, their spaceship is a giant motorbike, and they have 3 smaller motorbikes inside the spaceship. I can't remember what the 3 important things are to biker mice, but the number 3 is their bikes. The other one is like being cool and fucking punching shit or something like that. I don't really know. But they have now come back to Earth, which has also been taken over by these fish people. But these fish people are blending in with the other corporations that exist on Earth. And because all the corporations and businesses and things on Earth are constantly exploiting its resources, these fish people actually blend in really well with all of these other horrible businesses that exist in the world. And they are now just taking everything from the world. They're destroying everything. And I just think that's such a cool idea for a show. And I think there's so much to work with there. So obviously, the world building of Biker Mice from Mars is going to get a 5 out of 5 for me. It is set in our world, but the world is so far gone from our world in the future. And it's this dystopian future now taken over by fish people and corporations and stuff. It's its own thing. So 5 out of 5 for world building. In terms of powers and abilities though, the biker mice, they're kind of strong, I guess, and they have a few techie bits here and there, and their bikes are sentient. But I don't know what their powers or abilities are, really. I'm going to give it a 3.5 out of 5. In terms of adaptability then, you could totally adapt it, but there's a lot of techie stuff. There's a lot of scenes in this show that are dealt with on bikes. There's a lot of racing themed battles. And so because of that, that is a little tricky to convert. I think I'm still going to give it a 3.5 out of 5 here for adaptability though. But then overall for the story and premise of Biker Mice from Mars, definitely top tier, 5 out of 5 for that. So we're going to have another 17 here. Biker Mice is getting 17 out of 20, which is going to place it somewhere around here. Oh God, where do I put it? Danny Phantom was 17.5, so I think it's here. It's in front of Code Lyoko, I think. Yeah, even though I think it should be higher up, to be fair. I think it's a much cooler premise than some of the ones here, to be honest. Now, I actually think it might be a bit controversial, but I think it might even be more fun to play a Biker Mice from Mars game than it would be to run a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles game. There's just a bit more work involved, but I think if there was less work involved and you put in more effort, like it could just be like an S tier campaign setting. It's now coming to the end of today, which is the day after I started recording this. I don't want this to go into 3 more days. My camera has died many times trying to make this video, and I'm very close as well to running out of memory. So we're gonna go and do a bit of a speed run through these now. Recess. Recess is about kids in a playground, and they're just hanging around in the playground trying to survive recess, which is the break time during school hours. World building, 0. There's nothing interesting. It's just our world. You know, could potentially get points for, you know, being a kid's world, but no points there. In terms of powers and abilities, no one's got any powers and abilities. They've got unique things they could do, but everyone's unique in their own unique way. In terms of then adaptability, I'm going to give it like a 2. Again, you can adapt most things into D&D. There's nothing confusing to adapt in here, though I think maybe Kids on Bikes is kind of ideal for recess and be very, very fun. In terms of the story premise, I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5. It is a fun idea being kids surviving in the playground or whatever. I do think though, in the end of the day, it's just a show that's more fun to watch more than anything. That's going to give it a total of 6 going there at the bottom of D tier. All right, next up, we got a big one. We got Peppa Pig. Peppa Pig, probably the best thing it's got for it is maybe it's world building, and even then it's super mundane and normal. I'm going to give it a 1 for world building because everyone's animals in it. You know what? I'll give it a 2. Why not? Everything is pretty mundane, but there's no world building in this. I think 2 is actually too generous for Peppa Pig. Powers and abilities? There's no powers and abilities in this. Peppa can't even fucking whistle, as my fiance says. So there's maybe even a -1 here for Peppa Pig's powers and abilities. In terms of adaptability, I'm going to give it 0. The best you're going to be doing here is rolling a d20 and seeing what happens. There's no stats. There's no monsters. There's no encounters. 0 for Peppa Pig. In terms of story or premise, sure, I'll give it a 1, maybe a 2. I think that's at max going to give Peppa a score of 3. I think realistically it's giving you a 2. Down here at the bottom of poopy tier, even though I like Peppa Pig, I think that it's just not gonna happen as a D&D campaign, though I challenge you all out there to turn it into one. One premise that could work though is like a happy little tree friends approach to it, where they actually make Peppa Pig extremely violent, but it's very colorful and cutesy on the surface. Next up, Phineas and Ferb. These are two brothers trying to do as much as they can in their summer holidays. They are literally trying to do it all. They've kind of got a bucket list of sorts of things they're trying to accomplish. In terms of world building, it's a little more interesting than our world. I'm going to give it a 2 out of 5. You've got super villains and things, and you've got an organization of super animal spies, where Perry the Platypus comes from. It's a spy organization. That's like always a subplot that's happening in Phineas and Ferb while the main plot is going on. Their pet platypus is doing spy stuff. Again, kids love spies for some reason at this time. In terms of powers and abilities, I'm going to give it like a 1, but Phineas and Ferb are incredibly charming or really good at just talking to anyone to a supernatural level. They've kind of got these god tongues, and they're also super geniuses. You know, I'm going to even boost it up to a 2 out of 5 for powers and abilities, just because the things that they can accomplish are insane. In terms of adaptability, this is a tricky one. I'm actually going to just give it a 1 for adaptability. I think it's pretty tricky to adapt, and there's a lot of weird stuff going on with this. Everything's quite abstract. I'm going to give it a 1 out of 5. Going to be big cutthroat here. However, in terms of a story and a premise, I think it deserves a 4 out of 5. This is a really fun idea, and I think just the idea alone of having a campaign based around like a bucket list is a really, really fun idea. So Phineas and Ferb, that's going to get them a total of 9 out of 20. So that's going to put them right here at the bottom of C tier. Next up, we have Shaun the Sheep, a good show in its own right. In terms of world building, I'm going to give it a 1. The only reason it's not getting a 0 here is the focus is on the sheep. But all the other sheep in this are kind of just regular sheep. Shaun the Sheep is the only sheep who is kind of like beyond normal, but there's no powers or abilities that Shaun the Sheep has. In fact, they're probably less capable than a normal human. They're just on the like intellectual level of a human at the moment. So 0 out of 5 for powers and abilities, 1 out of 5 for world building. In terms of adaptability, sure, everyone can just play as sheep and use the sheep stat. I think it's a 1 shot at best. I'm going to give it a 1 out of 5 for this one. And in terms of story or an adaptability, 1, I think. Cool, you be sheep, haha, very funny. But I'm going to give it a 3 out of 20 here altogether. I'm going to put it just above Peppa Pig. I mean, Peppa Pig's a little more iconic, but I think at least there's some sort of thing going on with Shaun the Sheep. All right, though, real talk, though. I didn't know this next show. My friends have recommended it to me many times. This show is probably the ugliest show here out of all the 50 shows I'm reviewing. It looks hideous. It looks horrible. I hate the look of this show, but after diving into the show and getting totally absorbed in all of its lore and what it has done and what it has achieved, we're going to be talking about Reboot. Reboot is a banger premise. It's a banger show. It's an S-tier show in its own right. This show was creating 3D stuff like 6 years before Toy Story came out, when Toy Story is famous for having made 3D a viable thing. You know, before that, it was just all very much like people were making stuff up as they go. They made up a load of technology for Toy Story, and it's very famous for that. But shows like Reboot have not gotten that same amount of attention. And it's a huge shame because Reboot has done some crazy stuff. And Reboot had a load of restrictions starting off with the show. Loads of things they couldn't do. But there came a point in the show then where they figured they were going to be cancelled pretty soon. And so they started doing crazy stuff. They started doing all the things they wanted to do. And they made an absolutely incredible show. It's set inside a computer, in a robot city. There are several characters in here who try to defend this town. When games are invented, when games are made, they steal assets from this town that they're all a part of. So these main characters go into those games and try to win them. If they can beat the player in the game, they keep all the assets in the town. If they fail, then those assets are all taken away from the town, as are the people who were in the game. So the whole premise, they're trying to play all these different games. There's very different ways this kind of show can go, because there's always a different game. This show eventually becomes like post-apocalyptic, where a virus has taken over this place. One of the characters who was a child for 2 seasons has now been taken away and has lost one of these games to escape the apocalyptic world that was taking place, and now is moving from game to game to try to make his way back there. He is now a fully grown adult. He's lost his eyeball. It just gets so cool, and just there's so many things going on. World building. In terms of world building for Reboot, I'm going to give it a 5 out of 5. In terms of powers and abilities then, the actual main characters don't really have any particular powers or abilities that make them interesting. However, the games that they play kind of maybe can facilitate that maybe people will be getting unique powers or access to different things in each game. So I'm going to give it a 3 out of 5 for powers and abilities. In terms of then adaptability, I'm going to give it a 3.5 out of 5. I think it's very much, you can do this for sure. There's just a lot of work on the DM to make up new games and stuff. And almost, I think what could really work with Reboot here is not a D&D campaign, but almost every single time you play in a different game, you literally use a completely different system. And I think that is so cool and interesting. But maybe the base world that you play in could be a D&D world or whatever consistent TTRPG you want to go with. But then finally, in terms of a concept, in terms of a story, or premise, Reboot is 5 out of 5, hands down, and is probably one of the best shows here on the list. It should probably be an S tier show, but based on its numbers, Reboot with a 16.5 is actually going kind of like around here in the list, just ahead, I would say, of Kids Next Door. So I'm going to put it there for now. Next up, we got the Mystery Gang from Scooby Doo. You know them, you love them. They've been remade again and again and again. There's world building though for Scooby Doo. There ain't much going on. There's some aliens, there is some ghosts, but most of the time, especially for the original show that I grew up on, it's pretty much an everyday world. I'm going to give it a 2 out of 5 for world building. In terms of powers and abilities there, you do have your very specialized team here, but they're kind of just people. They're kind of just people who are a little good at a few different things. I'm going to actually just give them a 1 out of 5 for powers and abilities in Scooby-Doo. Next up, in terms of adaptability, again, I think Call of Cthulhu could be a fun choice here as a game system to use, but D&D, you could make it work again, but I don't think it's worth it. I don't think it's worth converting it. I think you're better off playing a different system for this one. So I'm going to give it a 2 out of 5. And then in terms of a story or premise, I think Scooby-Doo is cool, going after monsters every single week, solving mysteries and everything else. 3 out of 5, I think, at best for Scooby-Doo. So that's going to give Scooby-Doo overall an 8.5, I think, making it a D tier campaign, but it is a high D tier campaign, D+. Right up there though is Edd, Edd, and Eddy. I think Edd, Edd, and Eddy is a perfect premise for maybe Kids on Bikes or something like that. I say Kids on Bikes. I'm saying Kids on Bikes like I know Kids on Bikes. I know a little bit about Kids on Bikes. I think mainly I'm choosing Kids on Bikes here because it's got the word kids in it. And I'm just like, yeah, this thing's about kids, put them in Kids on Bikes. But I'm pretty sure I'm getting it right with Kids on Bikes here. Edd, Edd, and Eddy is about 3 guys called Edd, Edd, and Eddy. And they're just, surviving their childhood years. In terms of world building for Edd, Edd, and Eddy, I think there's enough lore in the child's world that to give Edd and Eddy like a 2 out of 5 here. It is very much a mundane world. It's very normal, but I think they have, at least to my knowledge, they have fleshed out enough. I think for Edd, Edd, and Eddy, like the world is interesting and it seems primarily focused on kids. I don't know if we see parents that often. To my memory, I can't remember if we see parents in Edd and Eddy too often. Someone's going to comment this in the comments below and correct me. But I'm pretty sure the world building, as interesting as it is, and it does, in my memory, it's really well thought out how things work in this childhood world. I also think because it's just our world, I'm going to just give it a 1 out of 5. It probably should get a 0 to be fair here. In terms of powers and abilities, no one's got any powers. I'm going to give it actually a 0 out of 5. Then in terms of adaptability, again, I'm going to give it a 2. There's nothing too obscure here or abstract that needs converting over, but why would you convert it over? Edd and Eddy 2. at max out of 5 here. And then in terms of concept, I guess like a 3 out of 5. I think Edd and Eddy probably is up there with Recess, with a low D tier here. Almost in poopy tier. Moving on though to some better quality stuff, we have Samurai Jack. Samurai Jack is banger. It's so cool visually, it is beautiful. The kind of vibes of Samurai Jack are so good. They use silence so well in here. It's kind of got like a noir vibe at times. The art style is just, it's so good. It's a show you need to watch. If you haven't watched Samurai Jack, or at the very least, you should watch the kind of final season that came out like a few years ago for Samurai Jack. It's so good. In terms of world building with the robots and the magic and the swords and everything, it's got to get a 5 out of 5 for world building. In terms of powers and abilities though, Samurai Jack doesn't really have any. He is a samurai, he's got a sword, there is a lot of magic in the world, but most of the heroes, for example, don't really have any kind of like unique powers or abilities. So I'm going to give it like a 2 out of 5 actually. But in terms of adaptability, it's very easy. In fact, I would almost give it a 5 out of 5, but the fact that there is limitations here, I'm gonna knock it down a peg and just make it a 4.5 out of 5, just because if you're all playing samurais, maybe it might be a bit boring because you might have to limit magic somewhat. But then in terms of the story, trying to defeat the evil kind of guy Haku, is he called Haku? I think he's called Haku. I'm going to give it a 5 out of 5. It is a terrific show. I think it's a really cool premise. You can draw so much inspiration here for a D&D campaign in general. So I'd recommend watching Samurai Jack and using some of the ideas in it in your games. And so Samurai Jack getting a 16.5, I think, again, places it around here. So kind of like somewhere in this general area in the kind of mid to low A tier. It's definitely an A tier premise for sure. I don't know if I can play that song. This is Rugrats. This was one of the first TV shows I used to watch as a kid. I love Rugrats. I still love Rugrats. It's such a beautiful show. And I'm actually going to give, for world building for Rugrats, I'm actually going to be very generous here and give it a 3 out of 5 for world building. It's our own world that it's set in, but it is in the world of the children. It's in the world of these babies, these Rugrats. And a lot of that world revolves around their imagination and things. You've also got Reptar in there. There's a lot of well-established like businesses and things like that in this world. I'm feeling generous with Rugrats, and maybe it is biased. I think it's 100% biased that I'm giving it a 3 out of 5. But I think Rugrats deserves some love for what it has created. In terms of powers and abilities, these are babies though, in the end of the day. It might even get a -1 here for powers and abilities. But again, they are very capable babies and they all have their own specialities. So I'm going to give it a 0 out of 5. In terms of adaptability then, again, you can make this work in D&D. You can make most things work. I think though, in the end of the day, there's there is rules and mechanics. I think you could definitely utilize some of the rules and mechanics in Rugrats. There's just not going to be much combat. I'm going to give it like a 1.5. And then finally, in terms of story, I think it deserves a 4 out of 5. I think Rugrats is very wholesome. It's very sweet. It's very cute. In terms of a premise of all being children or babies trying to like do whatever like mini adventure, I think it's a lot of fun. I think there's a lot of novelty to it. But that will bring Rugrats to an 8.5, making it a high D tier campaign. Right up there with Scooby Doo. Next up, we have one that probably most of you don't know about. I grew up with this one because I'm Irish. So this was an Irish kind of TV show. I don't even know if it was produced in Ireland, but the setting is definitely produced in Ireland. This is Jakers, The Adventures of Piggly Winx. And it's about a pig and a duck and a cow. They're all children and they're all living in old Ireland doing whatever the fuck. They're not really doing anything interesting though. There's no like crazy adventures that they go on. It is very much everyday stuff happening in a normal kind of world set a few years ago, back when Granddad was a child. And it's just a wholesome show. There's very little world building in this though. I'm going to give it like a 2 out of 5 just because there's animals. So the implication of that is interesting, and the fact that it's kind of in the past. So 2 out of 5 for world building. In terms of powers and abilities then, there's no powers and abilities. They're animals, but they don't even have like animal powers. Like if like Piggly Winx, he's not really good at smelling, for example, if he's a pig. I don't know if that's even like a thing pigs are good at doing, but like the duck, they can't even fly. There's no powers in this. Then finally, we've got adaptability, which is maybe a 1 maybe a 1 out of 5, I think. But then story and premise, kind of cute that you're reliving these times of like being a child in the olden times, but you're all animals, and that's kind of cute, and it's all a story told by a granddad. And there are some kind of fun elements there that you could take from. I think overall, though, it's going to get a 2 out of 5. Overall, that's going to give Jakers The Adventures of Piggly Winks a 5 out of 20, bringing it down here at the bottom of the barrel in poopy tier. I am sorry, Jakers. I love you, but you're not a D&D campaign. I'm sorry. Okay, next up on our list is the Wild Thornberrys. This is, again, I think it was made by the same people who made Rugrats. This is really, really fun. Or maybe I just think it's made by the same people who made Rugrats because there's a crossover movie called like Rugrats Gone Wild, where the Wild Thornberrys and Rugrats are like in the same movie. This is just a really nice show. The whole premise is that there's this family that are traveling around Africa, I think, and one of their daughters, the youngest daughter, she gains the ability to speak to animals through some spirit magic or something like that. She also has a pet monkey who she can now talk to, and he's very sophisticated and mature and everything else. This guy, Nigel, absolute goat. Nigel is the dad. He just has the best voice ever. I think it's a really fun show, and they're just going on adventures. A lot of the premise as well here is about like animal conservation, and like they're often battling poachers and things like that. So these are the kind of foes they go up against. I think in terms of a world building, I'm actually going to be, again, a bit generous here and give it a 3 out of 5 because you have this kind of spirit magic that exists there. I also think they have really fleshed out just Africa as a whole, as a place to explore in this world. It almost feels like another world, and I think it is beautifully done. I think if you can take something, even if it's from the everyday world, take the ordinary and make it extraordinary, I think that is beautiful world building. So I'm going to give it a 3 out of 5 for world building. In terms of powers and abilities here, like, you know, like you've got some other shows that I've rated here where no one has any powers. But they have gadgets and things. And I've rated those roughly around a 3 out of 5. Here, you don't have gadgets and you don't have many powers, but the main character, is her name Eliza? I think it's Eliza. She has the ability to speak to animals. And I think that deserves something. I'm going to give it a 2.5 out of 5 here. And I think if that is the premise alone, that you can just speak with animals and you're all kind of like some sort of druid, I think that is a really, really fun premise. I think if you're going to be turning this into a D&D campaign, you're all going to be playing druids or rangers and communicating with animals and just trying to protect nature in general. In terms of adaptability then, I'm going to give it a 3.5. You can totally just take the rangers and the druids. Obviously, it's very limited here, but it's pretty easy to do, I think. The fact that you are a child is knocking it down a few points. The fact that there's limitations is also knocking it down a few, but 3.5 out of 5 seems fair. And then finally, in terms of story or premise, I think it's a really wholesome one. I think it's a really lovely one. I'm going to give it a 3.5 out of 5, just because I think, again, maybe the longevity isn't going to be crazy here. You can take this and really push it, but I think the more you push it, the less like the Wild Thornberrys it's going to be, and the more of like just rangers looking after the wild it's going to be. You do need to still capture that family element, the fact that they are, there's children in here, there's a monkey in here, and everything else. I think it's an interesting one. It's a tough one. I want to maybe give it more, but I do think 3.5 maybe is fair here. Still though, it is going to be a high C tier campaign, and finally we have something higher than Super Duper Sumos in that tier. Next up, we have a really twisted one that was quite dark, but was really, really cool watching it as a kid. This is The Big Boy and Rusty. This is about basically if Captain America was a giant robot piloted by a little man inside, but a lot of people don't know that there's a little man inside and just think he's a giant robot. That is the premise here. And there is also a little robot sidekick called Rusty in this who helps him fight giant kaiju monsters. And some of these kaiju monsters are spooky. They are real eldritch beings sometimes. There's also like an evil organization there. There's so many things going on in this show. But the whole idea is that Rusty thinks that Big Boy is also a robot just like him. But Rusty is probably, I think, the only robot that exists that's completely AI. But he is a child, he's learning, he's growing, and he's actually very proud of who he is. He's proud of being a robot. And the whole kind of idea is the guy inside piloting Big Boy is kind of trying to pretend to be a robot too, so he can continue being a role figure for Rusty. In terms of world building, I'm going to give it a 5 out of 5 for world building. You've got this kind of old-timey vibe to this, like old-timey cars are all going around, but then you've got these really modern mechy robot kind of things going around, which is super, super cool. Then in terms of powers and abilities, you've got all the classic robot powers that these guys have. You've got mechs, and you got Rusty, he's got a whole plethora of different things. I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5 for powers and abilities here. In terms of adaptability though, I think it is a little trickier to adapt, and again, maybe better to be doing a different system with this one. I'm going to give it a 2 out of 5. But then in terms of story, I think absolutely it deserves a 5 out of 5 for a premise. I think this is a fantastic show. I think it's a great story. It's got loads of potential here for a great campaign. That is going to put Big Boy and Rusty right here at the end of A tier as an A tier campaign. Another one, we're running out of space up here. All right, next on our list, we have the ultimate cartoon of cartoons, and that is Looney Tunes. Looney Tunes is wild. I don't think I need to explain what Looney Tunes is. The only thing I will say is it's one of those ultimate cartoons that almost has its own definition in like the dictionary, where it's like, this is Looney Tune logic. It is classic cartoon logic, which makes Looney Tunes really tricky to like convert into Dungeons. And also, what is the story? What is the premise of Looney Tunes? Sure, with Bugs Bunny, the guy's gonna go out and he's hunting rabbits, but there's not much to work with Looney Tunes in terms of a premise and an ongoing story and adventure. There's lots of little things going on, but also collectively as an overall story, they don't really do much. But in terms of world building, I do think Looney Tunes deserves maybe a 3 or a 4 out of 5. I'm gonna say a 4 out of 5 because there's so many things going on in Looney Tunes. In terms of powers and abilities then, I'm gonna give it a 2.5. Like, yes, they can do loads of cool, crazy stuff, but like there's no defined magic system or powers in it. And it's really hard to pinpoint what any of them can do. If you could tell me exactly what Bugs Bunny's powers are, besides just reality manipulation, I'd love to know. I'm sure the likes of like Death Battle has covered something like this and really broken down what Bugs Bunny, for example, can do in every episode. But that's just one character. So many of the characters are so varied in this show. It's really hard to know, what powers and abilities they all have access to, which makes converting this to Dungeons and Dragons, its adaptability, a 0 out of 5 without a doubt. This is like near impossible to turn into D&D. Of course you can if you work really, really hard, but ideally in an ideal world and being realistic, it should be a 0 out of 5, I think. And then finally, in terms of a story or premise, I'm actually going to give it a 1 out of 5. I think it's really fun. Maybe I'll give it a 2 out of 5 just for the fact that it is a novelty. Because of the novelty of it, I think it could be quite fun for a one-shot where you all play as cartoon characters. But there is no ongoing story. There is no real depth to Looney Tunes apart from making you laugh, which is not a bad thing. Looney Tunes is a wonderful show. It is not going to work here in terms of a D&D premise, however. Overall, we're going to give Looney Tunes a 7.5, actually putting it ahead of Kim Possible. So I'm going to put you right there. Next up, we have a beautiful show. This is a really, really cool show and it really inspired me and I really felt seen with this cartoon. This is Chalk Zone and it's about a boy who finds magical chalk and discovers that every drawing that is ever made all ends up in this world called Chalk Zone. And he can go into Chalk Zone and he can explore it and like interact with all these old drawings. I think he finds one of the very first drawings ever drawn. This is like a friend he's made. He's kind of drawn himself like a superhero friend. I can't remember what his name is, but this guy and the main boy, they kind of go on adventures in Chalk Zone and he's trying to hide the world from other people. But everyone in the main character's life, tells him that drawing is kind of useless and it's a waste of time and everyone kind of bullies him for it. I used to doodle all the time as a kid and this really, really resonated with me as a show. I think it's a beautiful premise and I think there's a lot of fun to be had if you can work out the mechanics for what happens when you just draw anything and it comes to life. In terms of world building, I'm actually going to give it a 4 out of 5. I think it's a beautiful world, Chalk Zone. I think it's a wonderful concept and there's a lot of depth to it and they go to a lot of lengths with exploring that whole idea of what happens to drawings once they are drawn and where they end up. In terms of powers and abilities then, I think the concept of basically being able to do anything within the limitations of your drawing skills is quite fun. I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5, I think, for this, because I think it's also such a unique power an ability. And also, obviously, all the drawings in here can kind of do anything. So there's kind of unlimited potential with the powers and abilities in this show. In terms of adaptability though, this is a really tricky one and it's going to rate quite lowly. I'm going to give it a 1 out of 5 because the concept of trying to conceive this and translate it into D&D rules specifically is very, very difficult. However though, for a story and a premise, I think it's a 5 out of 5. It's a beautiful idea. And I think if you can make this work, let me know in the comments how you would make this work. I think it'd be really, really fun. I think it deserves almost like a whole TTRPG to itself. Overall though, this is a 14 out of 20, making it a B tier. I think putting it just ahead of Fairly OddParents. And actually, I'm wrong. It actually goes just ahead of the Powerpuff Girls as well. So we're gonna put it right there besides But Ugly Martians. Next, when people wanted to capitalize on He-Man's success up there in the top of S tier, can you even see that? You can, just about. So they then came up with Bravestar to sell toys, pretty much. This was a giant advertisement for more toys because He-Man sold so many, and it was not as successful, but I still enjoyed watching Bravestar when it came on around 6 or 7 a.m. in the mornings. In terms of world building, Bravestar's world is kind of cool. It's not as interesting though as He-Man's. I'm going to give it a 3 out of 5 in terms of world building. In terms of powers and abilities then, I'm going to give it a 3.5 out of 5. Our main character, Bravestar, has the strength of a bear, the eyes of a hawk, the speed of a puma, and the ears of a wolf. Not in that order though, the song sings it slightly differently. But with those abilities, amped up to the 9s, these are the capabilities of this individual. He's basically a ranger or a druid of sorts. And I think that makes it quite easy to adapt into D&D. And therefore, I'm going to give adaptability a 4 out of 5. I think Bravestar is kind of a fun premise, but also if you're like doing Bravestar, it's like, well, no one knows Bravestar as well, so why don't we just do He-Man at this stage? There's a lot of interesting things. He's got like a robot horse character. There's a few other fun little quirky characters in this, but primarily they're all big advertisements for toys. In terms of the story, you're a sheriff trying to stop evildoers and stuff in this kind of like cyberpunk reality. I'm going to give it a 3 out of 5 though for the story because it's not memorable in my head. And I don't know where you would go with it besides being a law enforcer. This ultimately gives Bravestar a 13.5 out of 20. So I'm going to give it, I'm going to put it on the bottom of B tier in terms of premises. Next up, we got a hello baby, we got a Johnny Bravo over here. Johnny Bravo is a satirical show making fun of guys who harass women and try to teach kids. This show is targeted towards kids. It should not be, but it's trying to teach kids, hey, don't be this guy, all right? Because everyone hates him. In terms of world building, Johnny Bravo has like a 1 out of 5. I think he's got some animal friends, like humanoid animal friends who talk, so it makes it slightly more interesting than our world. 1 out of 5 for world building. In terms of powers and abilities, Johnny Bravo actually kind of sucks. He's strong, but he also is, he's got no charisma. He's kind of just insufferable. I'm going to give the powers and abilities of the show a 0 out of 5. In terms of adapting into D&D, there's no confusing stuff here. You could totally adapt it into D&D, but there's also very little combat. It's just you. The whole premise of Johnny Bravo is he is trying to get a date. 2 out of 5 max. And then in terms of a story premise that you are just out trying to get a date, I think this is fine for one small like session in a D&D campaign. This is not a campaign premise by any means. I'm gonna give it a 1 out of 5 max for premise. Yeah, Johnny Bravo is gonna get a 4.5 out of 20, putting it down here in poopy tier. There we go, Johnny Bravo, kind of in the middle area roughly in terms of tiers. Next up we got Sonic X. He loves chili dogs. I watched Sonic X specifically as a kid. There are so many Sonic TV shows out there, but this is one I remember. Sonic X, he's a fun guy, he goes fast, he's from another world. The world building is pretty good in this. I'm actually going to give it like maybe a 4 or a 5 out of 5. Yeah, we'll give Sonic's world a 5 out of 5. To be fair, they worked on it for a while. In terms of powers and abilities, you go fast. You've also got some other animalistic kind of characters. They've got unique powers, but nothing too memorable. I'm going to give it like a 4 out of 5 in terms of powers. In terms of adaptability then, you just go for any speed build in D&D. Just make your character as fast as possible. Make them some sort of animal character, and you're good. I'd say 4 out of 5 for adaptability. And then in terms of story, there's a lot to break down in like Sonic's story, obviously. But there's a reason they made so many games about it. There's reasons so many TV shows about it. 5 out of 5 in terms of story. I don't think I need to explain the story of Sonic the Hedgehog. There's so many stories to tell. That is putting Sonic the Hedgehog at the bottom of the barrel in S tier campaigns, which I'm sure will make some people very, very happy. Okay, my camera has died again, but we only have 3 more left. We only have a little bit of juice in this camera left before it dies for like the gajillionth time. So we're going to cover our last 3. We've got Teen Titans starting off strong. Now, Teen Titans is a DC thing, and I try to avoid a lot of comic book things, but I feel like Teen Titans is kind of enough of a cartoon show on its own to stand up here. And it's going to be rated highly because it's got a DC world, it's got crazy superpowers, you got access to everything. World, powers, they're all getting a 5 out of 5. In terms of adaptability, 5 out of 5 as well. You know, you can even put down each of the characters and what classes they would be. Like Robin would be like a mixture of a rogue, kind of monk, fighter build. You've got Starfire, she would definitely be like a sorcerer. Raven is definitely a warlock, and then you've got Beast Boy, who is 100% a druid. So the team is sorted already. You just need that team, and you go off and you're being superheroes. I think, though, for the premise overall, teen superheroes just saving the day in general, and kind of, I guess, is nice is more the teenage tropes as well that are there, like maybe just hanging out and doing fun things as well. I think premise-wise or story, it's a 4 out of 5, but it does get a 19 out of 20, so it's right up here in S tier as a premise. Following up from that, we have the Grim Tales of Billy and Mandy. This is a weird one. I didn't really like this as a show, actually, growing up, to be fair. But I know a lot of people did, but it's got that classic Cartoon Network humor, where you got the violin be like, yee, as they're doing something funny and like slowly creeping into frame or something like that. In terms of the world building, I guess you're bringing in a lot of like things in here from mythology, which is kind of interesting, so I'll give it a 3 out of 5. In terms of powers and abilities, I don't really know what Grimm's powers are. Billy and Mandy definitely don't have any powers, but he is death, I suppose, so he kind of just has a lot of death things, but it's not very interesting. I don't think there's a whole bunch of depth there. I'm going to give it a 2 out of 5 for powers and abilities. In terms of adaptability then, I think it's a fun warlock premise as well. Like, you could adapt it to D&D kind of, but you are playing children as well. There's not much combat in this. It's maybe a bunch of problem solving and just comedic things that are happening. I'm going to say a 2 out of 5 for adaptability mechanic wise. And in terms of the overall story or premise, this is where it maybe rates the highest. Like the idea that you're children, like warlock children, and you've managed to capture death itself, and this is now your patron, and they gotta kind of do your bidding. I think that's fun. I think the premise is like a 4 out of 5 maybe. So that's going to rate it kind of like middle of the road, C tier, 11 out of 20. We're going to put it like, I'm going to say be between Totally Spies and Johnny Test. And then finally, before my camera dies, this show, I'm going to say right now, is going into poopy tier, but it is one of the coolest shows of all time. It is such a vibe. This is Hey Arnold. If you haven't watched Hey Arnold, or you haven't watched it in a very long time, go back and watch it. It deals with themes of disappointment and just kind of normalcy or whatever. That's not a word, but like, Hey Arnold, he's not like, well, Arnold is not like super content with his life. He's actually quite disappointed in a lot of things. Even though his life isn't normal in any way, he's got a lot of interesting people in his life. He's kind of just like, about it all. There's a lot of sadness in Hey Arnold. However, it's going down a poopy tier for a lot of reasons. The world building, it's just New York, I'm pretty sure, 0 out of 10. In terms of powers and abilities, there are none, 0 out of 10. In terms of adaptability, you can't capture Hey Arnold in D&D, 0 out of 10. In terms of premise though, I think it's beautiful. I think it's a 4 or 5 out of 10 just for the vibes alone. But in terms of a D&D campaign, I don't think it works. So I'm not going to knock it down a point. I'm going to say it's 4 out of 10. Bringing him right there, kind of around, Dexter's Labratory and Johnny Bravo down there in poopy tier. But I do think, and like similarly to a lot of these shows, based on how they're rated, some of these shows are excellent shows, but they're really lowly rated here, just based on the system I've provided. I'd recommend you check out all of these shows and let me know in the comments which ones are your favorites. What shows would you love to play in the D&D campaign? Yeah, so my camera died again. It died like 7 or 8 times during the filming of this. And honestly, I had no idea that this video would take me as long as it has. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end if you have. Also, thank you so much to all my patrons who continue to support me even when I haven't got videos out. Thank you so much. Thank you especially to my hero goblins, to Tom WDW, Xander Brooks, Wither King, Bridge on the Lake, and Sam Lake as well. Funny, we got 2 lakes now. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to check out a previous video that I did rating all these anime as well, check that out as well if you want to binge some more stuff while you're cooking or doing whatever chores that you need doing, or if you want some more kind of engaging content. I've done a lot of skill tree videos on anime and other things. I made a whole class of skill tree for D&D. Check out any of the videos that you see on screen. Thank you so much for watching. I love you all from the bottom of my heart. I genuinely mean that. Thank you so much. Goodbye.